welcome members and any members of the public to the 70th meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 2022 to 27 mandate. Members, as always, this will be recorded, broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. Anyone who's in the public gallery, and indeed members, ideally put your phone on off or on airplane mode, but if not that, then silent is fine. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We have no apologies. We do have one member who's joining us remotely, that's Jerry Carroll. Agenda item 2, declaration of interest. Does any member have an interest they want to declare? No. Okay, members, the next item, 3.1, we're moving on to chairperson's business, is from the Executive Office, and it's an urgent written statement, which is the publication of the Executive's third response to the COVID-19 Module 1 report recommendations. That was laid on the 16th of January 2026. It's a further update on the Executive's response to COVID-19 Inquiry Module 1 report. I suspect some of these matters will come up in our inquiry into the civil service, but if any member wishes to comment on that now, they're more than welcome to. No? Okay. We'll move on. Agenda item 4 are draft minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of January. Are members content that they are a true reflection of the meeting we had? And I should put on the record here, we had a very helpful meeting and a very interesting one last week at Lanyon Plaza in the offices of Land Property Services. We got to look at some very interesting old documents and see some very innovative maps produced by LPS. I found it very useful given the importance of the work they do in terms of well, lots of things, land registration, but also revenue raising here in Northern Ireland. So I found that very interesting. But the upshot is the minutes are in front of you. If anybody has any comments on them, let me know now. Otherwise, I'll sign them. Content? Thank you. Content. Thank you. Okay, I'll sign those minutes. Agenda item 5 is matters arising. At page 26 of the meeting pack, the department has provided an updated copy of the LCM tracker, the legislative consent motion tracker. Members will be aware, this is as per, I think, goes way back to whenever we had some of our earlier conversations closer to the a couple of years back when we talked about, whenever we had requested, I think, the LCM tracker, which is now regularly updated, so it's a useful useful innovation. And we are obviously going to be talking with the LCM on the Public Office Accountability Bill, and we hope we'll get an update at some point soon in the Cyber Security Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill. Okay, so that's to note unless anybody wishes to come in. 5.2 is the Dallow extract on page 27. The department has provided response to a query raised on the 19th of November. So it's a good thing we chased for this one because it's pertinent to something that a lot of us have been talking about today, and indeed there has been a demonstration out the front, and we can, and I think members will want to talk about it. That relates to the Local Growth Fund. We previously asked the department for a written briefing on developments and work to expedite the development of the Local Growth Fund, particularly the composition of the funding, and asked for a readout of the meeting between the Finance Minister and the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. That took place on the 22nd of October, and it was highlighted at last week's meeting. A response was subsequently issued, and it provides, it's been issued now, and it provides us a readout of the previously, of that meeting. It's page 28, I should have said, at the meeting pack, of that meeting, as well as an indication of next steps. The department highlight the Finance Minister continues to press MHCLG for a funding split which meets local needs and at least reflects the more favourable resource profile given to English mayoral, quote, given to English mayoral authorities. The department would also indicate that MHCLG is finalising a commission for existing SPF projects, working in collaboration with the NIO and NICS departments, which is expected to issue shortly. Furthermore, the Department of Finance is working in conjunction with relevant NICS departments, NIO and MHCLG to inform the development of an investment plan for local growth here. Work continues between MHCLG, NIO and NICS to have the economic and activity element of the Local Growth Fund in place from the 1st of April 2026. Officials have indicated they will keep the committee updated. As members will recall, at the meeting last week we agreed to ask the Department of Finance if it has any detail on the Pride in Place announcement and corresponding funding. The committee also agreed to respond to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury's correspondence on the matter, seeking clarification regarding the use of the word flexibility with regard to local growth funding. As members will be aware, critical to this issue is flexibility or lack thereof around capital versus resource spending, and the insistence basically that the balance or the burden is on capital here, whereas virtually the entirety of our community and voluntary sector who are engaged in employment support work are keen that it continues to involve resource, i.e. spending on wages for people who are trying to get more vulnerable and more economically inactive groups into work. This correspondence was issued today and was copied to the Finance Minister and Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. We await response to that. So we've asked members, obviously that question about what it means by more flexibility. I just wanted to put on the record there was a demonstration outside the front of Parliament buildings earlier on today. Huge, widespread participation from the community and voluntary sector. I'm pleased they came up here to make their voices heard. I think it's fair to say there's deep frustration with the position the UK government is taking in relation to this. I don't think it is I don't think anyone's going to contradict me when I say there is unanimity. So I suppose that would include the executive parties and the official opposition here, and I'm sure the smaller parties, that this is an unsustainable position the UK government is taking. I assume the executive is, and clearly the Finance Minister made that point in October, and hopefully is continuing to make that point. I would suggest that, though we have already written to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, that we, I suppose, expedite or ask them when we'll receive a response. Once we get a response, I guess we can reply pretty much immediately to say this needs to be sorted as soon as possible. And by sorted, I think we mean clarity on the volume of funding, but also that the flexibility is not going to result in the kind of funding loss that the community and voluntary sector are already talking about, because it's completely, I think, unacceptable, and there is huge concern within the sector about what it could mean. But I want to put that on the record. I'll bring others in. Brian Kingston, and I don't know if others want to come in, the Deputy Chair after that. Yeah, Brian Kingston. Yeah,
well, look, I think we all share in the frustration over the restrictions in this fund. According to the briefing we have, the executive, the Northern Ireland Executive, will manage all elements of the fund from April 2027. So it's just this coming year when this important work will be cut back, with the potential for it to expand again. But in the meantime, valued staff will be lost, projects will lose momentum, people will lose out on the services. So it is intolerable, I think, to all of us on this committee. I note the last reply the Finance Minister received was on the 23rd, or sent was on the 23rd of December. I mean, all we can do is keep pushing through our means, through the Minister, to the NIO and to MLUG, for them to relent on the split of the funding. If that means us writing again, I think we've written to everyone probably concerned, but all we can do is write again. I welcome the strong turnout today that on a very cold, was it an afternoon, the strength of feeling within communities across Northern Ireland and this important work, which certainly I support in my part of Belfast and elsewhere. So we're probably doing all we can, but all we can do is continue to write. And the other funding is a Pride in Place that was flagged up last week. But we assure people we're on their side of the argument on this, and we're making every representation we can.
I think there's a fundamental contradiction in the UK government's position, which is the Northern Ireland Executive is responsible for administering this. We're giving the Northern Ireland Executive, and then saying, and look, with my other hat, I'm more than happy to hold the Executive to account as I do all the time. But in this one, they can't, the UK government on the one hand say you have the flexibility and the power, but also you have to spend it like this and devastate the community and voluntary sector. It's just an indefensible position.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank you, Chair, and the clerk team for moving the start of our meeting and event today slightly to facilitate us being able to support that across all parties, and a number of us were out on the steps. Something that everyone has very strong views on. I chair the all-party group on the voluntary community sector and was pleased to be out there with Nick for showing support, but it is just incredibly frustrating that nobody seems to be able to get any answer. And when you see the size and scale of the reach of this, there are people who travelled really, really far to come up here today to stand on those steps at the front of Stormont on this freezing cold day with their banners for their services. And when you're speaking to them and when you see the range of the different organisations that are so directly impacted, for me there's Action Mental Health based there in Downpatrick in my constituency, and there's so many people who are referred straight by their GP into into them and organisations like them for mental health services, because there's nothing else available to be provided within the health sector. There's extern that were there, and the vital services they have within the Department of Justice, and I fully support everything that we can do to try to address this absolute catastrophic outcomes that there will be if there's no answers in the next couple of weeks here on this. But also, I have put a couple of questions in, and I wonder, has there been an assessment by individual ministers or on a wider scale as to what this actually means for delivery of public services? Because whenever a lot of these organisations aren't able to be in place and doing what they do, I referred to a couple of organisations there, like there's going to be a really direct impact frontline public services and what the departments are actually going to do. So this is going to be so wide scale. I don't know, has there been a full assessment of what it means? And I think that to try to be able to capture that, the humanity of it, the impact on frontline public services and what it'll mean for people here is really important in any last minute strong case that we're trying to make out of the committee.
Okay. Deirdre Hurd.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. And I think just as you say, I mean, the organisations and the communities here have been let down again, as they were let down. I mean, the fundamental flaw was Brexit, and this is the outworkings of it. And with all the false promises that there would be replacement funds, that it would be at the level of what the European Union give, has transpired that that's not the case, and actually they've just been continued to be cut. And also where the local executive here had no oversight over it. And as you say now, that where they're looking to transfer, there are stipulations as to how that money can be divvied up. So again, it's a further slap in the face. I mean, I think the groups that were out there, I was didn't expect the crowd that we got, and I think that shows the level of feeling and concern. And in fairness, it was right across all constituencies in the north. Organisations were there today, and as Diane said, from disability groups, mental health charities, community organisations at the grassroots, women's organisations as well. So it cuts right across our communities. And the key thing for me is, that people are being put on protective notice now. So that dismantling of the vital infrastructure, because this is targeting those furthest from the labour market. And you can't, it's difficult trying to target them anyway. But if we lose that vital infrastructure at the grassroots, you don't just get that up and running again next year or the year after. That's going to take time. And this flies in the face of what they're trying to say they're doing around job start and funding allocations, because that's targeting the same group of people who are furthest removed from the labour market. And when you look at our economic inactivity levels on top of those with disabilities and other restrictions again as well, we need that vital infrastructure. And this government is just not recognising that in any way, shape or form. So I would support the proposal that we do right again, that we reflect the sense of feeling from communities and from the sector here, and the fact that all parties in this assembly are united on this as well, and just to see what additional pressure we can apply to it. Thanks, Chair.
I think that makes sense. So we are due to get responses back hopefully very soon, including and then I think we can, if we don't get it very soon, I think we should chase and send further correspondence highlighting the strength of feeling. I think also the contradiction in the position. There is a fundamental contradiction, which is, we want you to do more, but you have to do it. This has to be the
on our terms.
This has to be on our terms. This is the funding mix, and it's and actually it's being applied differently in England. So my understanding is, like local authorities in England are getting more flexibility.
Yes, it's a different split, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. So we will do that. I think it's really important that we communicate strength of feeling, I think, from the committee collectively as well as parties. Okay. Yes.
Who will we write to, Chair?
So we're waiting on. So we have written, first of all, to
letter to the CST Chair, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, in response to the one
he sent us.
that he got from him last
week. Just for the record, for the purpose of clarifying it, what the committee established we got a letter back from the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, someone called James Murray, who said we are working with the MHCLG, the executive, presumably the MIO, to improve flexibility on how this fund is going to operate. He just said flexibility, so in one sense that's maybe positive in the sense that he used that word and acknowledged that we needed more flexibility. He didn't offer clarity on what that meant, how much flexibility, and certainly not guarantees around funding. We are going back to press for more detail on that. That letter is being copied to the Secretary of State from Northern Ireland and the Finance Minister for his information. We will chase for it has just issued, so we will expect a response soon. I think if we don't get a response back quickly, we will, and when I say quickly, I mean beginning of next week, maybe. Too noon?
They have been faster, Chair, than predecessors, a lot faster.
That's good.
And Chair, when members talked about that letter last week, we hadn't had the further response from the Minister on the readout of his October meeting, which we now have. So there's a bit more detail there that would suggest there is a lot more discussion.
Yeah. So I think that we obviously, to be fair, the department has said they will keep us abreast of the discussion. So we reiterate at that point, we want to hear more rather than less about those discussions. So we wait a response from the Treasury and also from other departments who are entitled to respond to us should they wish. Once we get a response to that, I think we can then underline again the strength of feeling. Unanimity, okay?
Chair, did members also want an assessment of the impact on the services provided through local departments?
Yes, I think
in terms of this as well.
DOF,
I would have imagined, would be aware of any work done. So if we put that through the department to see what they know about that.
Okay, members content with that. Now, members, we go on to 5.4, which is it's at page 30, and that is another letter from Lord Carlisle, who chairs the House of Lords NI Scrutiny Committee, which looks at matters, a variety of matters, particularly relating to the tobacco. This is about tobacco. More broadly, it's about Windsor Framework and related and the application of all of that. The House of Lords Scrutiny Committee is writing to the Exchequer Secretary of the Treasury regarding Council directives on tobacco and related products. I think this is actually it's important because it relates to the Windsor Framework. I do think it's particularly important for Northern Ireland, Windsor Framework and a Windsor Framework, which is high levels of tobacco, of counterfeit tobacco here, and which is a challenge for public health and as well as revenue and some of its linkages to crime, including paramilitary crime. So it would be helpful to be kept abreast of the response to this, and indeed we may want to flag it onwards to, for example, the Justice Committee.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I was going to say, it's a declaration of interest. I sit in the Windsor Framework Committee, but yes, please.
I think it is important, like any applicant will have a
Vice Chair, just to declare that if we need to.
Yes, you both seem really delighted to be declaring that interest. Lucky you.
Trust me, I'm not.
Okay. 5.5 is from the Financial Secretary to the Treasury, and it relates to on related matters. It's correspondence to the same Lords NI Scrutiny Committee. That's page 36. And it's a response relating to the trader support service satisfaction scores. We've been copied in as a courtesy to note, and anybody wishes to comment.
Yes, just to notice paragraph 4. We've been asking HMRC for a long time on statistics about how disruptive the Irish sea border is. And it's the first time I've ever seen it stated that the trader support system supported 10,400 businesses to complete 1.33 million customs declarations in 1 year within our country. I think that is something that needs to be highlighted. 1.33 million customs declarations for inside the United Kingdom. That's a disgrace.
I'm tempted to say,
I know you are.
It's an awful thing. I know you are. Wouldn't it be great if we were all still in the single market and customs union of the EU?
My opinion on that, Chair, I would be glad if we were still there.
But for the purpose of getting through the agenda, I'm going to move on unless anybody else wishes. Any people are entitled to make a comment if they wish. But okay, great. So we're going to move to the table pack. 5.6. Spring supplementary estimates 25-26. That's the page 3 of the table pack. The Department has formally provided the Committee with a copy of its 25-26 SSE memorandum. Officials are scheduled to provide us an oral briefing on this and on the budget bill and voting account at the committee meeting on the 4th of February. So members, is to note, pending that oral briefing, unless anybody wishes to ask for any further information in advance, I suppose the only question I would ask is to be kept abreast of these are the Department's spring supplementary estimates, but there is obviously the Westminster supplementary estimates, which we are told we may involve some additional funding for here. So obviously we would ask, I presume, those spring supplementary estimates will write in all of the additional autumn budget allocations.
Chair, by the 4th, I would have thought.
By the 4th of February. Okay. to note. 5.7, Committee for the Executive Office reserve claims for those affected by mother and baby institutions, Magdalen laundries and workhouses. That's at page 16 of the table pack. The Executive Office Committee has copied this committee into correspondence from the Executive Office regarding such reserve claims. The committee has been informed, as this committee was by the Department of Finance, that a redress scheme is unlikely to fall into categories considered for reserve funding. It is indicated that ministers will continue to raise this with both Secretary of State and the Treasury, and are disappointed that no contribution has been agreed to date. So the upshot of this is, I think, us probably trying to establish when or how, if so, there was the reserve claim back and forth happened on data breach with the Justice Department and Justice Committee probably. It was then established that there wasn't going to be a reserve claim, and it's now factored into next year's Department of Justice budget. Obviously, there's a legitimate question about whether the UK government position is defensible or not. Nevertheless, it appears that the executive has now maybe, grudgingly had to accept that. So I suppose, can we ask the department what planning they are doing on the basis of crystallising this as assuming, or not assuming, but the contingency that if the Treasury does not accept this as a potential reserve claim. Okay, members can have that. Just so we ask what the planning is. Construction 5.8 is Construction Employers Federation press release on infrastructure levy. There's a press release from the CEF setting out updated figures for the infrastructure levy proposed by various bodies last June. That's to note. It's at page 20 of the table pack. 5.9 is publication of schedule of values for revaluation 2026. Members, a hard copy is being distributed. Perfect timing, Heather. Thank you. This is news. I'm just seeing this now for the first time. That's great.
We'll also go, Chair, into next week's pack.
Yeah.
So, so members, you can see in front of you that tomorrow at noon on Thursday, the 22nd of January, Land and Property Service will publish the draft schedule of values for revaluation at 12 noon on that date, Thursday 22nd, tomorrow. Release the draft list is intended to give ratepayers the opportunity to view their proposed valuation. I'm reading from the correspondence now. To view their proposed valuation for ahead of April 2026, ratepayers will be able to compare their valuation with nearby and similar properties, and if they believe their NAV may not fully reflect the available evidence, I suspect that might happen in one or two instances, they can request an informal review through the online system. Informal reviews will be directed automatically to the appropriate valuer. So we're having a briefing on this next week, and I suspect we'll all be paying close attention to it. Does anybody else come in? Deputy Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And you had raised this last week at LPS, and I'm just thinking of the outworkings of this. The letter's not really giving any indication as to how big of a hike this is going to be or what it's going to mean for a lot of people. And I know you had raised it about, if there's anybody that's going to get a significant increase, has that been communicated in advance? Will it come as a huge shock tomorrow? And what that means for people and how it's managed. Just in terms of that, before we get the briefing and all the detail of it, I would expect tomorrow after this comes out, there'll be a lot of very panicked people. I don't know, is there a helpline? Is there anywhere we can get a bit more information on it? I'm just trying to think of,
Public representatives?
Yeah, just for troubleshooting tomorrow, because I would expect that there would be a lot of that tomorrow afternoon, especially as this comes out ahead of actually the rates are agreed. People won't understand necessarily what it means for them. So just if there was anybody dedicated within LPS for any of us to be able to just coordinate those queries, because I believe that it will trigger a lot of that, and when people are coming on to me and my office, I don't really know what.
I think that's fair for us. Can I suggest the clerk of the team, someone asks LPS if they have a...
Sure, I'm going to see if I can get that live.
means, and that we can be corresponded. We may not do it live via session, but we can correspond it via WhatsApp or email, so the members have it and can disperse that to their own party colleagues, or however is best to do that. People are content. That's a good point. Brian Kingston.
Is that both domestic and non-domestic, or not?
No, that's non-domestic.
It doesn't state that.
Right. Useful if they put
the reval that there have been, those happen every 3 years for non-domestic. The domestic reval won't be until 2030.
Maybe the first one since 05.
Okay.
Much less regular, obviously.
Yeah.
I think we can, sorry, through the chair, I think we can expect lots of correspondence coming from the business community and everybody. Yeah.
Yes, not quite as many if it was the domestic revaluation. It's a fun job for us all to look forward to. We're still here in 2032 or whatever. Okay, so members, we will now move on to agenda item 6, which is an oral briefing from the Department of Infrastructure on the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill, which again I have always forgotten my hard copy of. Hello, how are you? So, members, on page 42 of the meeting pack, we have a clerk's memo on this briefing. Also included to assist members is a Committee for Infrastructure response from the 1st of December last year in relation to clause 17 of the bill, which is what we're mostly discussing today, which is page 44 of the pack. Committee for Infrastructure response to us from 15th of September. Including correspondence from the Infrastructure Minister in relation to the bill, page 46 of the meeting pack. So, members, this is in relation to that specific clause, clause 17 of the bill relating to travel concession passes, which will provide DFI with the power to impose a fee for the issue of a smart pass or a duplicate smart pass under the concessionary scheme. The Infrastructure Committee has completed its scrutiny of the clause, indicating that it has a preference for delegated legislation under clause 17 to come before the Assembly by a draft affirmative procedure, as opposed to what's on the face of the bill, which I believe is not draft affirmative. But we will go to our colleagues and give them the opportunity to brief us on it. Thank you very much for coming to the Finance Committee. You're either lucky or probably cursing your luck, but anyway, you're here now because we're doing the AFP bill. We've got Brenda Burke, who's Director of Transport Regulation and Public Transport Policy, Linda Buick, who is Head of Public Transport Strategy Branch, and Mary Claire McCullough, who is from Public Transport Strategy Branch. You're all very welcome. Brenda, please do make a brief opening statement, and members, as always, indicate should you wish to ask a question. Thank you.
Okay. Chair and committee members, thank you for the invitation to brief today on clause 17 of the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill, which provides powers for the Department for Infrastructure to charge a fee for the concessionary fares pass. The concessionary fares scheme has been a cornerstone of accessible public transport in Northern Ireland for nearly 5 decades. It was first established in 1978 under Article 5 of Transport Northern Ireland Order 1977, providing free travel for people who were registered blind and half-fare travel for senior citizens and more disabled pensioners. Over time, the scheme has progressively expanded to reflect social need. Free travel for those aged 65 and over was introduced in 2001, extended to more disabled pensioners in 2002, and in 2004 additional disability-related categories were included for half-fare travel. A significant milestone came in 2008 when free travel was extended to all men and women aged 60 and over, creating the modern Smart Pass framework we know today. So the aim of the scheme is to promote social inclusion by improving public transport accessibility through free and concessionary fares for members of the community who are most vulnerable or liable to social exclusion. Through the scheme, eligible groups benefit from either free or half-fare travel on both bus and rail services throughout Northern Ireland. These entitlements help reduce isolation, support well-being and encourage a shift towards sustainable transport. However, the financial environment with which the scheme now operates has changed significantly. Over recent years, the scheme has come under increasing affordability pressures, even if the benefits it delivers have remained clear. In 2024-25, the overall cost of delivering concessionary travel reached 50 million, with over 740,000 attributed specifically to administration of the scheme. These are unavoidable operational costs that the Department incurs, regardless of how often an individual uses their Smart Pass. Looking ahead, these pressures will continue to build. Our population is living longer, meaning more people are becoming eligible, and they're retaining their eligibility for longer periods. At the same time, the real cost of providing public transport continues to rise year on year. Without action, the cost of operating the scheme in its current form would place increasing strain on the Department's already constrained budget. Recognising these pressures, the Department for Infrastructure undertook a review of the scheme and in 2023 conducted a 12-week public consultation on a suite of proposals aimed at supporting long-term affordability and sustainability. The consultation explored a number of options, including raising the age of eligibility from 60 to 65 or aligning with state pension age, which is the case in England and the Republic of Ireland, restricting free travel to bus only and or off-peak, which is after 9:30 a.m, and refining disability-related eligibility. Alongside these, the consultation included the proposal to introduce a fee for Smart Pass applications, renewals, which is every 5 years, and replacements. Feedback demonstrated the public's strong appreciation of the scheme's social value and a clear desire to retain existing entitlements. Proposals to increase the age threshold or restrict entitlements were strongly opposed, reflecting the real-world impact such changes would have on independence, mobility and access to services. By contrast, introducing a fee for the Smart Pass was widely viewed as the least impactful means of supporting sustainability. 46% of respondents who provided a view agreed with the introduction of a fee, and many of those opposed indicated they would accept a modest fee if it protected the scheme. Having carefully considered the responses, Minister O'Dowd decided to retain all current entitlements, recognising the value of the scheme for older people, people with disabilities and the wider community. This decision means that the Department must identify alternative and proportionate ways to strengthen the financial sustainability of the scheme. So it is in this context that the Department intends to introduce a fee for the Smart Pass. The purpose of this fee is not to generate revenue, but to allow the Department to recover the administration costs associated with issuing, renewing and replacing Smart Passes. These costs include staff time, processing, printing and postage, card production and system hosting. They are real and reoccurring costs that continue irrespective of how little or how much someone travels using their pass. The Department's aim is straightforward: to protect and sustain a scheme that delivers significant social benefit while ensuring that public funds are used responsibly. Introducing a fee for the Smart Pass is the least impactful measure to achieve this, particularly in comparison to options such as raising the age of eligibility or restricting travel times, both of which were strongly opposed during consultation. In addition, introducing charges to offset administrative costs could help contribute to the cost of extending free fares to other categories, such as disabled people. Importantly, the fee will only be payable when an individual applies for the Smart Pass, renews their pass every 5 years, or needs a replacement. For the majority of users, this will therefore be an infrequent and relatively small cost. In addition, the Department intends to explore exemption options for groups who may be disproportionately affected. The level of fee has yet to be determined. However, based on current administration costs and assuming the fee is levied on everyone who is eligible for a Smart Pass, it's estimated to be around £12, and that's £12 every 5 years. To put the proposed Smart fee into context, it is important to consider the scale of the benefit that pass holders receive. For 60 to 64-year-olds, the average Smart Pass user receives approximately £144 per year in reimbursed free travel. Over the 5-10-year lifetime of the Smart Pass, that equates to around £720, and a fee in the region of £12 every 5 years would therefore represent less than 2% of the value of travel received. For senior Smart Pass holders aged 65 and over, the average user receives about £745 worth of travel over the lifetime of the single Smart Pass. This also represents then less than 2% of the benefit received, demonstrating that the fee is modest when set against the value of the entitlement. We also recognise that not all Smart Pass holders travel regularly. Around 56% of senior Smart Pass holders and approximately 88% of 60 to 64-year-olds use their pass in any given year. Yet the Department must still cover the full administrative costs for 100% of passes issued.
Brenda, could you repeat that? What percentage use it, don't use it in a year, did you say?
Well, 56% of senior Smart Pass holders and 88% of 60 to 64 use their pass. So that would be 12% of 60 to 64-year-olds don't use their pass, and 44% of senior Smart users don't use the pass.
Over 65, it's 44%. Between 60 and 64, it's 12%. Over 65, it's 44.
44, yeah, who don't use it in any given year.
Okay. Yeah.
So in this context, the proposed fee is equivalent to roughly the cost of 3 Metro Day tickets spread over a 5-year period, and clearly a proportionate contribution towards administrative costs rather than a charge for the travel itself. So a statutory provision is required because the Department has no existing legal authority to recover the administrative costs of issuing Smart Passes. The Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill is being used as a legislative vehicle because it already contains a number of cross-departmental financial and administrative provisions, and therefore offers a timely and efficient means of progressing this enabling power. Relying on this bill avoids the need for a separate DFI bill, which would take significantly longer to develop and schedule and would delay the department's ability to take forward a measure essential for the sustainability of the scheme. The provision contained within the bill will provide powers for the Department for Infrastructure, its agents, to charge a fee for the Smart Pass exercisable through regulations. Initially, officials proposed that the regulation setting Smart Pass fees should be subject to negative resolution, and the relevant clause has been drafted as such. This approach was considered appropriate because the delegated power relates solely to administrative charges, and the negative resolution procedure allows flexibility for updates without placing unnecessary burden on Assembly's time. However, we've taken into account the views of the Infrastructure and Finance Committees, and bearing in mind that the fee setting process is not that time critical at this current point in time, the Infrastructure Minister is content to adopt affirmative resolutions for these regulations. While this introduces an additional step, it provides greater transparency, and the additional scrutiny may strengthen overall confidence in the scheme. So the committee should note that the Department intends to introduce an online application system for the concessionary fare scheme, and the final level of the Smart Pass fee will be informed by the administration costs associated with that system once it is in place. The fee will be collected through the new online system, incorporating an automatic payment function, and the Department is working closely with TransLink to consider the operational and administrative arrangements. In summary, the introduction of a fee represents a necessary and proportionate step to ensure that the concessionary fare schemes remains affordable and accessible for the long term. It supports the continued delivery of a scheme that is widely valued and that contributes significantly to social wellbeing across Northern Ireland. Chair, members, that concludes my opening remarks, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for coming to see us. Just, I suppose it's useful to get all this in the records. I'm sure those people watching this aren't totally aware that the executive has effectively made a policy decision that there would be this charge. I don't think it's. I know there was some coverage of it, but I think it's important to clarify. It's also important to clarify for anybody watching. The power in this legislation doesn't give the minister the right to do away. I suppose that could be a policy decision someone could make at some point in the future if they wished, but it doesn't involve doing away or reducing eligibility. It's an administrative fee that can be charged.
Yes.
Okay, so it's just to go through that detail a little bit. If you are, what happens at the minute? I'm not quite there yet myself, but I will be probably sooner than...
Declaration of interest.
Declaration of interest. That looks like a very deceptively young photograph, Dr. Aiken.
Oh, it's me, honestly.
Oh yes, it's very shadowy. I think the officials may need to...
65 one or the 60 plus?
No, that's the 60 plus one. Steady you, don't be insulting the committee here now.
He's inspected by the... There may need to be anyway. So someone turns 60 and they're resident in Northern Ireland, do they automatically receive a Smart Pass in the post?
No, you have to make an application for it. I mean, currently you make the application using a paper form,
yeah.
And you have to leave it into TransLink, and that's why this online application process, which will be developed, and we will be looking to automate it as much as possible and to do the verification through automation as much as possible to try and reduce the administrative burden.
To apply for your pass at the minute, you go to the post office or somewhere else to get a form?
Well, you pick up the form from a TransLink office from the my husband got one recently, that's how I know, and he picked it up from Central Station and then had to leave it in physically to Central Station along with he brought his ID, which was his passport or driving licence, and they obviously then did the tick box, and he got it through the post then.
Okay, so this what will happen, assuming this is passed, the minister will then introduce regulations to introduce a charge. How is the charge you're telling us now will be £12? Presumably £12 isn't set in law or regulation. How is that determined? How do you arrive at £12?
Well, the £12 will take into account, the £12 is purely illustrative based on current administrative charges, and it is calculated by assuming that everyone who is eligible for a Smart Pass, whether it's half fare and full fare, whether you're 60 plus or 65 plus, would pay that fee. Now, as I said, we will be looking at options to see whether there would be categories which would be exempted. There wouldn't necessarily, there could be a cross-subsidisation that the lower age group could maybe pay a higher fee than the higher age group. We could exempt categories, even potentially, if you did have a very good means of verification and through automation, you could bring in, for example, exempt low income pensioners over 67. You could decide to exempt all pensioners over 67, over 65. So all those options have to be explored. But how the fee will be calculated will be looking at the total administrative costs and using that to calculate a maximum fee.
When did you, assuming this gets royal assent, this passes, we're only in committee stage now, it sounds like still quite a lot of work to be done in terms of the design of how this fee would work.
Absolutely.
What is the earliest possible date you could introduce this charge?
Well, at this point, we would be intending to introduce the charge when the online application system is going to be implemented, and we don't have a timetable for that as yet. But we are in discussions with TransLink to try and pin down.
Is it likely? Are we talking months or years?
I would imagine, Linda, are you able to throw any light? We're talking
possibly next financial year.
Next financial year, meaning 26, 27 or 27, 28?
Yeah, 26, 27, at the earliest, but kind of late into that. Like, we're only at the early stages of discussion with TransLink on the online system, so, the spec of that needs to be scoped out and how it might be implemented and operational issues. So there's a lot of work to be done on it. So, it'll be a number of months, at the
expectation that the application happens on the TransLink website or NI Direct?
That hasn't been kind of.
Is it what's happened is just the principle has been decided that you want to charge people for these cards, and then sort of everything else is kind of either regulation or to be discussed with TransLink?
Well, not necessarily with discuss with TransLink, but the online application system, we want to move to that, because, people expect, these days to be able to apply online. Yep. So, TransLink administrate the scheme on our behalf. Mm-hmm. So that's why, and they have the contract with the card supplier, so that's why we're in discussions with them just around the spec of the online application system.
You said, Brenda, in your opening that you weren't looking to generate, the department was not looking to generate revenue. So not looking to generate revenue obviously isn't the same as it being having to be revenue neutral. So clearly the critical thing will be understanding. So will you be essentially establishing how much administration costs are in, for example, year one, and then dividing the amount of expected applications and not charging any more than that? Or will you start with an amount, £12 is the number that's been quoted, and then going from there, and if there's any extra, well, that goes back into the
No, I mean, I think in terms of the options around exemptions, as I said, I mean, one option would be to charge everybody the fee, irrespective of use and irrespective of whether they were disabled or age, etc. And if you were going to do that, the fee would be charged by looking at the total administrative cost divided by the number of users, and that would give you the fee. And that means that you would not raise any more than the total administrative costs. Alternatively, you could look at an option whereby, and let's for the sake of argument, let's say it's 750,000, you could look at an option whereby you charge those who are 60 to 64, or those who you think that would be more able to pay a higher rate, and raise either the whole 750,000 through them or a portion of that. I mean, if I bring in the account in London, I mean, I've already alluded to the fact that free travel is only available in England and in the Republic of Ireland for those over pension age. In England, those who live in London, who are aged 60 to 64, are able to avail of free transport in London. They pay a £35 charge for an Oyster Plus card, and then £18 a year for a renewal fee, and that's sort of a verification of their address. So that sort of equates to £107. That's what the 60 to 64 are paying. So we could potentially look at a higher charge for those who are assessed to be more able to pay, and others could be exempt. We may, and a decision may be taken to keep the fee lower and only raise a proportion of that 750,000. These are all options to be decided. But what we're looking for is the power to be able to actually raise the fee.
So we've got hopefully lots of public transport users from Sacred Heart and Uri who have joined us as part of this committee session. You're very welcome, guys, and I hope you find it useful. So just to understand, at the minute the administration costs are how much per year?
The administration costs we've estimated based on TransLink costs, the cost of introducing the cards, or and also departmental costs around about £700,000 to £750,000.
And so if you divide that, how many Smart Pass users are there currently in Northern Ireland?
Well, it's kind of more, I guess, maybe how many applications, renewals, and
stock flow versus stock.
There were, so for example,
101,670.
So
roughly about 102,000. So their applications, renewals.
But it costs about 700,000 to administer per year, and there's about 100,000 applications per year. If I was being cheeky, I would say, shouldn't it be £7
Yeah,
to head?
and we've done a few adjustments to that. I mean, obviously we've made adjustments taking into account of a fee handling charge, for example. I mean, this will be based on actual real costs. So the example that that we've used in terms of £12 is purely illustrative, to try and give you an idea of the magnitude of it. I mean, we're not talking about a £50 charge, and this is £12. If it was £12 over 5 years or 15, we could give a range. It could be anything from 7 to 15, for example.
And final question for me, because I think a lot of people will be, though, yes, that's not a huge amount of money, there are people who will use these passes. So there'll be people who presumably use public transport, not necessarily for the first time, but a lot more when they turn 60 or 65, because all of a sudden it's affordable for them, and we have to be mindful of the person for whom the number of times they get the bus or the train is a real cost, because they are very vulnerable and very low incomes. Has any modelling been done on the number of people who, and it might seem like a number, but there might be some people who simply say, actually, I'm not going to bother now, or I'm not going to, actual people who simply don't avail the service. Have you done any modelling on that?
Not yet, and that is something we'll take into account. I mean, in terms of if it was discovered that people on very low incomes would make a decision not to use public transport if this fee was introduced, then obviously that would impact decisions around exemptions. So for example, I mean, and again, I mean, as you know, that there would be a lot of administrative work involved in verification of particular. I mean, the more exemptions you put on, the more administrative work, and therefore the more cost. So there has to be a balance, and that's why we hope that we're investigating this system, this online application, and we're moving quick, in terms of automation. There are the likes of. I mean, obviously, age is something that could be determined if you decided we would introduce the fee for over 67s, because there was a huge correlation between ability to pay and age. You could do that, but you could potentially increase an exemption for those who are on particular benefits if it's practically possible and doesn't impose huge costs.
Okay, I'm going to bring in other members now because I have several questions. Deputy Chair first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here. I know it's a different committee than you would probably usually be involved with, but this piece of legislation is, I think it's the first time we've brought so much together, administrative and financial provisions. It's not just the financial provisions. So whenever we got it, and all the different clauses are so different, and this one's infrastructure. Really appreciate you coming to speak to us on that, because whenever we saw it, first of all, a big thing for me was trying to go through all the different clauses and understand what's a tidy up, what's a brand new power, and those different elements. So I think, just for complete clarity, this is completely new, and it's a new thing to cover admin costs because you've had this review and you're looking to future services. So this is just completely brand new.
It's a brand new, yes. The proposal to introduce a fee.
Thank you. And as well, whenever we had looked at it previously, the Transport Northern Ireland Order 1977 just set out the basic terms, with the second clause saying, these are the concessions. So whenever this clause in this bill started talking under the header of concessions about bringing in new fees, I felt that it wasn't very much in the spirit of what the original clause in the legislation was doing. But from hearing this from you today, I understand what it is that you're trying to do. It doesn't just seem that this is just a provision to bring in charges under a concessionary head. I totally understand that it's an admin thing, but as well, it was the negative resolution piece. And again, in your opening remarks, I appreciate you're saying that the Minister has, you have worked on this and would be content to move some of the things to affirmative measure. I think that would be very important to be able to give us all, give the Minister, give the Department, give us as members an opportunity to speak to this to the floor, because I don't think people will just understand the wider context of this, especially in the first instance, because this is a power being drafted in with negative resolution and given a power that if at some point in the future you were to bring in charges, how did that happen? you know, how did that slip through? And it feels like there's a lack of transparency there, and like, I had raised that point before, and I think that's really important. And so you're saying that would be...
We're happy, and we appreciate that it does give a level of transparency, you know, to the introduction of the fee. Yes, and the Minister's content.
Thank you. And then whenever you're talking about going to the new system, like an online system, would it be a completely brand new system that's needed, or is there any other system in place through government services or any of the shared service functionality, Department of Finance, where this could be a module added on, or do you think it has to be something completely standalone?
That will be something we'll discuss with TransLink, and they will be options we'll explore, but I imagine it may be new, just so that it aligns with all the rest of TransLink systems. But we will explore that if there's efficiency to be had, you know, definitely.
Remember, it's just there's a whole lot of things there with the Department of, I know, because I know TransLink sits that wee bit separately, and it's different, but within the Department of Finance, a lot of move to digitisation, a lot of different charging facilities coming in, so it would be good if it was able to be considered, you know, if it was just something that was happening somewhere else, it could be another module of the same, it could be, you know, could be efficiency there. It would be good. And just the chair had raised the point as well about you know, just the pattern of use, and I think when it comes to these smart passes, it's something where you know, people are working all their lives, and it's an aspirational thing in the future. I know from my mum, who nobody would believe would have her own smart pass, of course, but you know, the countdown was on, she got it, was very, very proud to get it, and there is very much that feeling across society, and where the, you know, the pension age is increasing, we're seeing a lot of hits to older people. I think that, you know, people feel quite strongly about this.
That was coming out in the public consultation. We had a number of focus groups, and that was a very clear message, you know, just how much people valued it, and how important it was to them, and how, you know, they were looking forward to the day that you know, that they had it. So yeah, that was definitely very clear.
People, so we shouldn't underestimate that. But I do think that I represent South Down. I live in the Mournes, and in my area, apart from the school buses, the buses are pretty empty. So if those people weren't going to use smart passes, and you know, there'd be a lot of even more empty buses. So I don't think it's displacing anybody or really costing any money. You know, people being on those buses. I know obviously it's different, you know, in and around the city and things. So it's just you know, for me, it's actually quite good for the environment. Whenever people, like, you know, my mum and her friends are going out for the day, they're getting the bus in the city centre, and you know, there's a good outcome to that. And I think there's just a whole lot of wider perspective, but it's good that came out strongly in the consultation, because that's very much the feedback that I had around that, and I think it's just important to, you know, remember. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Jerry, Carol. Jerry, you're on mute. You might be mute. You're on mute there.
Just takes a minute.
Thanks. I was unmuted by the officials, and remute himself was my fault. Apologies. Thanks for the presentation. I said before that I'm opposed this policy, but I appreciate the officials from the DFI coming and presenting, as much as I do disagree with, and a few questions. Something the chair mentioned, but I want to sort of tease out a bit further. The Law Centre have stated that a payment for registration of this pass will create a barrier for people on low income, and I know it was mentioned in passing about maybe waiving it for people on benefits. What sort of aspect, how much has this been considered in detail, and also maybe respond to the point that they have made that a fee would likely deter people from a plan?
Well, in terms of the point, as I said, you know, once we've got the power to do the fee, we will be looking in detail in terms of how we would levy it. And we're very, very aware, and the Minister's very aware, that we don't want to disadvantage anyone disproportionately. So for those that are on low incomes, or those that you know, rely heavily on public transport, and this would impact their decision, we will definitely take that into account when the setting of the fees. Now, as we've pointed out, you know, that I know, and it's easy for me to say that £12 over 5 years is nothing, but I know for some people that may be quite a lot of money, and we will be looking at exemptions, and we will be looking at how we do that in a practical way. You know, there are means of being able to be able to be verified as being blind, for example, and being eligible. In the same way, we would hope to look at how we could bring in ways in which people can provide evidence that they're on low incomes, and bring in exemptions around that. We will also look at the, as I said, the cross-subsidisation. There are those, particularly in the, those who are still working between the ages of 60 to 64, where £12 over 5 years, or even £20 or £40 over 5 years is a relatively small amount, particularly relative to the benefit that they're getting for it. So we could look at looking at levying different fees on different groups depending on age, income. So they will be all options that we will consider in detail. Definitely. I mean, we totally take on board the point that
Okay, thanks. I mean, obviously the point is £12 is low for people who are working, but obviously it's the principle, but also it's likely it will rise likely over the years. It was referred to about people living longer, but I think it has to be added in that there's obviously still quite a large life expectancy gap. The brave constituencies like my own West Belfast and others, I think it's about 9 or 10 year life expectancy gap where people die younger when they're in poor areas, and that's of course not to mention the fact that there's healthy life expectancy where people in deprived areas tend to get unwell or disabled and they reach about 50 or their mid 50s. So I want to sort of ask how is that being factored into the department's deliberations just on this policy?
I'm not clear what you mean in terms of the the policy and the eligibility criteria are what they are. Once you're 60, you're eligible for the pass. Once you're 65, you're eligible for the cross-border travel. So I suppose you're eligible for it as long as you live. So in terms of the life expectancy, it doesn't really impact the policy. Now, in terms of the policy and relating the fees and the correlation between that and income, we would hope to take that into account through look at when we're looking at criteria for exemption. As I said, there are things like raising this fee does give more revenue to allow the minister to expand this scheme to more categories. For example, extending half fare for disabled people to full fare. So and that will maybe again for example those who are in PIP and those who have got illnesses, mobility related illnesses or mental health disabilities could be eligible for free travel. So we're looking at that full picture and looking at all social groups.
Okay, I think it was you referred to it's not about raising revenue, but I think we've heard a couple of times that revenue raising connected to it. So I just think there's two different things here. But that being said, I just want to ask as well, just two other quick questions, if it's okay, how the department stands over implementing this policy, because it was referred to in passing that a majority of consultation responses from the department's own consultation actually opposed. Over 50%, 54% opposed a fee being levied. So how does the department stand over implement this policy against the wishes of the respondents to its own consultation?
I think when asked the questions, people were very strongly opposed, or more strongly opposed, to changing the eligibility criteria, and a number of the 56% who said that they were against introducing a fee qualified that with they were happy enough with a small fee as long as it didn't impact the eligibility criteria. So I mean we can send you the more detailed analysis of the consultation responses. But you would expect, I mean, to be honest, I was actually quite surprised that even it was as low as the amount that was opposed to it, to be honest, because usually when you ask questions like that, you get 100% opposition. But as I said, there were a number did qualify to say that this is the least impactful measure, and they were aware that something needed to be done in order to protect the scheme for the long term.
Okay, I suppose a majority, still a majority, but thanks for the answer. The other question was about, you referred to in passing some of the costs, several hundred thousand, I think if I heard that correctly, about implementing this, but quite often in a general sense with implementing like a new scheme like this, it does become quite expensive, in some cases more expensive to implement it rather than money compared with the money raised. So like how confident it won't be the same with this issue? And the final question is about presumably if uptake isn't as high as it is for the Smart Pass now, then that £12 will likely, I would imagine, go up. And have you done any modelling around what the higher rate of the application would be if there's low uptake, if that makes sense?
Well, in terms of the analysis around what the impact would be on demand if there was a fee, that hasn't been carried out, but if a lot of the fee relates to hard charges associated with the postage, the card preparation, etc. So the overall costs would decrease based if less people applied, or if less people lost their cards, and also if less people renewed. But the overall impact would be considered to be negligible, I think, at this point. But we will do that analysis also. I mean, in terms of the amount, if there was a 20% reduction in uptake, again, without being, that would obviously make the overall cost of the concessionary fare scheme itself considerably less expensive, which would offset obviously the increased costs. But that is not something we want to encourage. I'm just pointing that out. We do not want to discourage people from using public transport, particularly if they're getting a social benefit from it.
Okay, thanks for your answers.
Ryan Kingston.
Okay.
Two questions. One, just to clarify further what Jerry Carroll was asking there about the amount of income from this. Paragraph 5 says the regulations may set a fee at amount that exceeds the cost of issuing the pass concerned. But paragraph 6 says, in setting fees, the department must aim to ensure that the income from them in a given financial year does not exceed the costs arising from the issue of passes under the agreement in that financial year. So, yeah, maybe it can be at amount above the actual cost, but in total it shouldn't be. So it shouldn't be revenue raising.
No, it's not revenue. It's not revenue raising. So for example, what we're saying is that the amount of money that can be raised through the issuing of the fee cannot exceed the administrative costs that associated with the card. So, for example, go back to the 750,000. The amount of money that could be raised through the fee cannot exceed 750,000. However, if we're saying that the individual cost associated with each Smart Pass holder is £12, we are saying that this regulation gives us the power to set a fee above the £12. And that is where the exemption. So, for example, if we considered that an appropriate fee for 60 to 64-year-olds was £20, and that meant we could exempt those from low income or those above a particular age, etc., then that would allow us to do that.
Right. Okay. So it could be a different fee potentially within the legislation. For the actual card,
be different. Yeah, we could do different. You could have a different fee. You could exempt those over 67, for example, and only charge 60 to 64 with the one fee, and maybe not even raise as much as the 750,000. Or you could aim to recover 750,000 through less people, which would mean a higher fee. So those options will all be explored.
But overall, the charge is not revenue raising.
Absolutely not. Yeah, no, yeah. It's not going to raise any more than the cost of administration.
As set out. One other question, just to understand how it works, not directly related to this wording, is TransLink subsidised per journey, or when the Smart Pass is used, or does it just become part of a general subsidy to public transport? To
TransLink are subsidised for the value of the journeys used, yes.
Right, so each journey by someone on a Smart Pass, there is an income directly, the cost of that journey goes to TransLink?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And as a previous declaration of interest, I do indeed have a Smart Pass, but I'm at the very front end of it. One of the questions that's been raised by a lot of our constituents is there is a lot of cards out there. There's the Health and Social Services card. There's various other sort of cards that come from various parts of government as well. Have you had any conversations about combining the cards and particularly using this and having e-cards?
Yeah, and actually I just came when I was looking at the Republic of Ireland's card. They have a public services card which can be used for a range of different, for example, prescriptions and transport with initials printed on them, and that is something that was brought to light. So as I said, we're in an early stage in this, but that is something definitely, yes, we would consider looking at down the line in discussions with TransLink.
Okay. One of the good things about that is because one of the things that this committee has said for some time, we want to go and sort of examine how the rest of it's done in Europe, and particularly I think it's in Estonia. Everything is done on an e-basis, which is also your identity, your social security system, but also all your passes and the rest of it. So it actually encourages a lot of people who are over a certain age to use these things, which actually increases their social mobility and their ability to interact with people as well. So it's not just a question of the cost of financial cost, but there actually is a social cost of excluding people from the use of the system.
Yes.
And again, it's a declaration of interest. If anybody sat in the enterprise train and tried to get a seat in the sort of the first class section when everybody's going down on their cards and they're paying the extra 10 quid, gets a bit squeezed. So, but it is a really important social piece. The other question I was going to ask, with the £12 administration charge, the online application process and the ability to use particular data to say who it is or whatever happens to be. Has there been any conversations with using how there's access to other government databases, particularly like NI Direct, which is on also the digital passporting process, so people can actually identify themselves, and maybe that might cut your costs down a bit from £12, because one of the most expensive things I would imagine would be trying to verify data, and that's one of the costs that comes through.
No, there has been no discussions as such, and the verification of the data is something at an early stage. I mean, it was used, for example, in the High Street scheme to verify applicants' identity, and I was involved in that scheme, so that is something that we would be looking to do in a similar manner. But yeah, and I don't say that I'm an IT expert or anything, but we're definitely going to get involved in all those discussions with NI Direct, and they're all very valid points.
And just one small one, sort of, Chair. One of the issues that obviously when we had COVID was one of the things we were trying rapidly to find people and be able to identify people, and that was when NI Direct came into its own, and particularly of all people, LPS became sort of the custodians of the Northern Ireland database, who's, what's what, wages, and the rest of it. I think if there's an option to talk to LPS to be able to look at how they did their processes to see if you could reduce that administration charge, that would be quite useful. But that's me, Chair.
Okay.
Very much.
No further members have indicated they wish to ask questions. Just a couple of final ones from me. So there's no time limit on this, so there's nothing in the legislation requires this to happen. You've suggested that it could, in a sense, the earliest it could be delivered is in the next financial year. That would be,
Wow.
and that's just an estimate really of the process.
Total estimate at this stage. Like, there's still a lot of work to do, obviously, on the policy side, in terms of the fees and everything, but also, in terms of the development of the system, and, all this, suggestions here about different ways that it could be done. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. So yes, but there's nothing, time-wise in the legislation that, requires it to be in by a certain date.
It's highly unlikely that it will get royal assent by the start of the financial year. It'll not long be out of this committee, but it may well have gone back for consideration stage before the start of the new financial year into the Assembly, but it'll not pass and get royal assent by then. So the earliest this could realistically be introduced is probably in 27 at some point.
Yes, once it gets royal assent, we'll need to, do the regulations and everything as well. So,
The regulations themselves could be, could have a commencement date which is a year or 2 years in the distance, theoretically.
Yeah, well, we'll have to work out all the policy and, the fees. But you would probably want to be bringing in the regulations close to the implementation date, because the regulations are going to set what the fee is. So, you need that kind of correlated with the administrative costs for that year. If it was for a year in advance, it would be difficult to kind of know what the administrative costs might be.
Okay. I think it would be helpful, I should make a comment personally, for the purposes of our reporting back to the Assembly, and indeed probably for the onward debate that will happen on the floor of the Assembly, that we are, there's at least an indication from the Minister, because the Minister won't be there on the floor of the Assembly. I think so this is in a sense our opportunity to clarify these points with you, because you're not going to be sitting in the box. The Minister, I presume, for the Administrative Financial Provisions Bill, there'll be a lot of officials in the box. They'll be standing room only for the civil servants in this bill. So we probably won't be able to get the information in real time when we're in consideration stage or whatever, or final stage. So I suppose from our perspective, as much of that information that we've asked for today, and the clerk team will be able to summarise it, but I think if we're able to talk to First of all, I think it was important that in the committee we were clear, and I know our counterparts in Antrim were, that we didn't think it appropriate. Even if this is a relatively modest charge, it will still have an impact. So it would be helpful to understand if any modelling has been done on potential impact of take-up, particularly among vulnerable groups of a cost. You know, it may be that there's behavioural studies elsewhere that people who are vulnerable or on benefits simply shy away from even a £12 outlay, or a £15 outlay, or a £10 outlay. That's number one. I think number two is around more of the detail, any more detailed policy considerations going on, which sounds very initial and very tentative at this point, around concessions to this charge, whether that's in relation to people who are in receipt of all or some benefits, or other people in other circumstances. I think it would be helpful to understand that, and any of the other points that we'll raise, but we'll clarify those in due course. And obviously any information, like, for example, if they've updated costs, it's currently about £750,000, but if that changes, we'd appreciate having all that information so that we can report back. I don't have anything else to raise unless anybody else does at this stage. Well, sorry, Deirdre Hargey.
No, just to add on that, I mean, I think it would be good. I mean, I think it's good that you've clarified that this isn't about revenue raising, this is about protecting the concessionary scheme. And I mean, I think it's right to raise concerns to make sure that, you know, the most vulnerable or those on lowest incomes should be protected where we can. And obviously, I mean, by doing this, you know, we could potentially expand the scheme, or as you say, look at exemptions, so we could in effect potentially bring in more people to the scheme in terms of the equality screening that may be done. So I think it's just important, you know, that, I mean, if you're picking any of that up, for that to be reported back in as well, that we could actually include more people at hardest to reach or most vulnerable by actually, in essence, protecting the scheme through introducing this charge. So it would just be keen to, you know, if there is any assessment that is being done or looked at, that could be reported back to us as well. Okay. Thanks.
Indeed. Although I would say positive, that could be a positive way of describing revenue raising in respect, because that's creating revenue in order to do another thing. So it's not always a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. And if the Minister's more detail on that, I would be more than happy to. Can I just check one final point of information on affirmative versus negative? Are we expecting the Minister herself to bring forward an amendment converting this from? It's currently on the face of the bill. It's now negative resolution. Will she and you amend it or bring forward an amendment, or indeed the Finance Minister should say, rather than or maybe it will be the Infrastructure Minister? Who are we expecting to bring forward that amendment?
Well, look, we'll liaise with the DOF officials maybe
Okay.
to just see how that kind of works out in practice. But yeah, we'll.
Yeah, I think we do need to know that information. It's boring but practical information that someone needs to know
what the process of the.
They're expecting us to do it, but like we've enough to do, as it were. Anyway, I'm sure you do. But if we could clarify where that amendment is coming from, because it will, the face of the bill will have to be amended, because at the minute it's negative.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Stevie.
Just a quick one for clarity, because we've got other parts of this bill we're doing as well. So even though it's by affirmative resolution, if it's a bill that's passed by the Department of Finance, it will have to come through the Finance Minister, won't it?
Right. Affirmative resolution. I think we said revolution there. I don't want people to get the wrong idea, given the state that we could send it in the world. No, it can be any. This is an initial announcement. It gives loads of ministers loads of different powers to do things. So it'll be the Infrastructure Minister who's given the power to bring forward regulations.
That has to be laid out in the bill, though, doesn't it?
Let's say it is laid out in the bill.
Right. Good. Yeah.
Okay. That point, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Now, members, we have another briefing on the AFP bill next, so we'll take a very brief comfort break to give people the chance to regroup.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
I want to be bouncing off the walls.
I need to bounce.
If we've been at it, this is what, 2 years in, and it's still a problem.
Okay, members, we are back. Order, members, order. We're back in public session. Order. Members, this is item 7, Administrative Financial Provisions Bill. We're having an oral briefing with Executive Office officials, having just had one with the Department of Finance. Members, at page 50 of the meeting. What did I say?
You said finance.
I said finance. My apologies. It's infrastructure we had previously. We now have Executive Office. At page 50 of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's memo on this oral briefing from the Executive Office. We have a response from the Executive Office on the provisions we're discussing today. There are clauses relating to the Executive Office. That's at page 53 of the meeting pack. The Executive Office themselves have responded, including their own response to the Executive Office Committee on this bill at page 58, and the Executive Office Committee response. The Executive Office response specifically in relation to the TO Committee's questions on or their issues relating to the child rights screening process. So, members, there are 6 clauses in the bill for which the Executive Office has responsibility. They are, in order, support services for victims and survivors, clause 6, asylum and integration support services, clause 7, public appointments, clause 8, ending violence against women and girls, clause 9, supplementary, clause 10, and the discretion as to a commissioner's term of office, which is at clause 14. The Executive Office Committee has confirmed to us that they have completed the relevant sections of their scrutiny. So we've got Gavin and Ronan. Gavin King, who's grade 5 in Victims and Survivors, and Ronan Murda, who is grade 5 in the Finance Division. You're both very welcome. I presume you have different bits or different clauses of this bill. I don't know if you want to take it in turns in terms of giving us an open statement, and then do you want to go first, Gavin, and then yourself, Ronan, and then members, as always, indicate should you wish to ask. Sorry, Ronan.
I think, probably.
Gavin's
introductory probably pretty much covers where we're both.
Okay. Then members, what I'm not going to do is I won't divide it up by clause, although there are quite a few clauses in here. So sort of ask what you like. Well, ask what you like in relation to this bill and the provisions in it relating to the Executive Office. Don't ask about Greenland or the price of fish. But if, Gavin, you're able to give us an opening statement and members indicate you wish to ask questions.
Thanks very much, Chair and committee members. Thank you for the invitation today to provide an oral briefing on the relevant TEO clauses contained within the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill. My name is Gavin King, Acting Director of Victims and Survivors Division, and I'm accompanied by Ronan Murtaugh, Finance Director. The 2 key areas relating to TEO concern aspects of policy delivery reflected in the clauses brought forward by TEO and technical matters relating to the delivery of Financial Transactions Capital, or FTC, reflected in clauses brought forward by the Department for Finance and Department for Economy. In relation to policy delivery, TEO is seeking to include clauses in respect of victims and survivors, support services, board training and placement programmes in respect of public appointments, asylum integration and support services, and ending violence against women and girls. These clauses seek, in general, to remove reliance on sole authority of the Budget Act for delivery in these areas and provide some flexibility in future approach. A clause is also included in relation to the term of appointment for the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse, or COSIGA, following a recent statutory review. I'll talk through these clauses in a little bit more detail shortly. I just want to briefly mention the issue relating to FTC. TEO has been working closely with DOF and DFE to resolve technical matters relating to the delivery of FTC. At present, the lead departments, DOF and DFE, are unable to fully administer FTC, for which they are responsible due to the position of legal vires. This currently results in the situation where delivery of FTC for these departments is channelled through TEO and the Strategic Investment Board, as SIB has the required legal vires. The changes proposed by DOF and DFE through the bill will provide a resolution to this issue and allow the lead departments to assume full responsibility.
I understand that, Gavin, before we move on, because it's quite a specific bit and it directly relates to our day job, as it were, here in the Finance Committee. At the minute, if the Communities Minister wants to draw down, and he's been making use of it, if he wants to draw down FTC for the purposes of social housing, that has to go through SIB and TO.
Well, Chair, that's maybe explaining why,
sure,
why I'm here.
I'm glad you're here, Ronan. Go on, yes. You give us the answer.
So FTC would be a matter, it's a very specific Treasury earmarked fund,
yes,
with specific conditions attached. So if the Communities Minister is seeking to use FTC, that's a matter for the Communities Minister to, set out the reasons why and to justify that.
Yeah.
The arrangements that we're dealing with are available to field any questions on today, are the clauses in respect to the FTC purely that is channeled through TEO at the moment and SIB, and those are purely relevant to higher education delivery and the Northern Ireland Investment Fund, and it's purely only those issues. There are other aspects of FTC which other...
I wasn't asking about the merits of the policy
wide.
decisions elsewhere. I was just saying, just to
it's
clarify.
Not all FTC.
Not all FTC. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, go on ahead, Gavin. Yep.
I'll now talk about the individual clauses relating to policy delivery in a little bit more detail. So Clause 6 of the bill contains reference to support services for victims and survivors. The Victims and Survivors Strategy 2024 to 2034 sets out a comprehensive framework to address the needs of victims and survivors of the Troubles conflict. And the strategy's vision is a trauma-informed society that addresses the needs of victims and survivors. TEO provides an oversight, coordination and management role to secure the delivery of services as part of the strategy. That includes, among others, services, the Victims Payment Scheme, Regional Trauma Network, the Victim Support Programme, and the Victim Support Programme specifically delivered by the Victims and Survivors Service, or VSS. But in recent years, VSS have also started to provide services to victims and survivors of historical institutional abuse, mother and baby institutions, Magdalen laundries and workhouses. So to provide these services, TEO has relied on the sole authority of the Budget Act. However, this can't be relied upon indefinitely. And TEO therefore wishes to introduce legislation that gives it the authority to fund victims' support services directly for victims and survivors in those spaces. It also needs the powers to amend such legislation so that it can make provision for relevant services, including grants for new groups of victims and survivors for which the Department may be given responsibility for in the future. Clause 7 relates to asylum integration and support services, and Clause 7 of the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill will regularise spend of the funding received from the UK Government for minority ethnic protection-based cohorts, such as refugees and asylum seekers. TEO receives this funding to coordinate services and support integration and build community cohesion. Again, TEO routinely relies on the sole authority of the Budget Act for the legal vires to use this funding, and Clause 7 of the bill is intended to remedy this by removing the need for the ongoing reliance on the Budget Act. Clause 8 relates to public appointments and the provision of development opportunities. TEO is responsible for public appointments policy, with individual appointment responsibility resting with the respective minister. And the Executive is committed to improving diversity in public appointments and ensuring that selection is based on merit. TEO wishes to avail of the bill to make provision to have the legislative authority to fund a competitively procured training programme to improve the skills and experience for those seeking to hold a public appointment. The overarching aim of such a programme is to provide opportunities for people to acquire the skills or experience necessary to hold public appointments and encourage wider diversity in such appointments to form effective public sector boards.
Just to clarify, Kevin, you were doing with the previous. Is that happening at the minute under sole authority of the Budget Act, or is it not happening and it's something that the Executive Officer would like to do?
There isn't work in this space at the moment, but we just, by bringing in this clause, it'll just give us hopefully the flexibility that when budgets are decided going forward, that would have the flexibility to bring in this process, because increasing diversity is obviously a key objective that we want to bring in.
Okay.
So as I say, the overarching aim of such a programme is to provide opportunities for people to acquire the skills or experience necessary to hold public appointments and encourage wider diversity in such appointments to form effective public sector boards. And the programme will provide an opportunity for those without board experience to enhance their knowledge and understanding through in-depth learning and support. Clauses 9 and 10 relate to ending violence against women and girls. In September 2024, the First and Deputy First Minister launched the Executive Strategic Framework on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, also known as EVOG. EVOG is a PFG priority, and through the EVOG clauses in the bill, we are seeking to ensure that there is an express power for TEO to implement the strategic framework and its successor strategies, but also have in place an express power to spend on this work, including on a grants fund. Again, the sole authority of the Budget Act has been relied upon by TEO to date, can't be relied upon indefinitely for this purpose, and consequently the Department has been working with DOF colleagues to provide a legislative basis for its EVOG activities through the EVOG clauses in the bill. And finally, Clause 14 relates to the term of appointment for COSICA. The HIA Act 2019 requires that ministers every 5 years commission an independent person to review the operation of COSICA, and in August 2024, First and Deputy First Minister commissioned Professor Alexis J. CBE to undertake an independent statutory review. That took place in October 2024, with a final report delivered to officials in February 2025. And that review recommended extending the Commissioner's role for a period of 18 months to a maximum of 2 years, and then to determine whether the role should be broadened. Ministers accepted these recommendations and in June 2025 invited the Commissioner to continue in the role until December 2027. The HIA Act I mentioned previously does not put any restriction on the findings or recommendations of the review. However, the schedule of the Act restricts a term of appointment to 5 years only. So in order to give ministers discretion to accept the recommendations of the review, an amendment of the schedule has been proposed so that the term for COSICA is to be for a period not exceeding 5 years, just to give that flexibility. Chair, that concludes my summary of the TEO-related clauses within the bill. I'm happy to answer any questions that members might have.
Thank you. That was a very useful summary, Gavin, and thank you, Ronan, for clarifying. But we are very keen to ask lots of questions. No doubt, so members, please indicate. So, okay, to go through them in turn, in many ways the Executive Office has the broadest powers, I think it's fair to say, granted by this bill to clarify some of these. I think it's fair to say some of these are, there's one financial provision which relates to, I suppose there are multiple financial provisions. There's somewhere administrative and financial provisions are mixed up together, i.e. there's VIRES to do things and VIRES to spend money on things. The exclusively financial provision is around FTC. Most of the others are a mix of powers being taken to do things ranging from additional powers around funding victims and witness services, which is already happening but under sole authority of the Budget Act, funding asylum and immigration services, notably integration services, training for people applying for public appointments with a view to improving diversity or to giving people the opportunity to apply for those things, or encouraging more people to apply. And the Clause 9 is about specifically about ending violence against women and girls. I'm just going to start with that one at the beginning. On a plain reading of that, it's an extraordinarily important issue for the whole Executive, and I think for everybody, given the crisis around violence against women. It's drawn extremely broadly. 9.1, anybody reading it would say, God, that's very broad. And there must be a reason it's drawn that broadly. It says, the Executive Office has power to do anything that it considers appropriate for the purpose of furthering any of the aims, brackets, however described, in the strategic framework to end violence against women. Now, that is limited by the following clause, which says, Clause 10 says, the power under Section 9 does not enable the Executive Office to do anything that it is unable to do by virtue of a limiting provision, presumably elsewhere in legislation. Can you give us a sense of why Clause 9.1 is drawn in such a broad way? And then it goes on to say, by the way, in 9.2 it says the power under subsection 1 includes power to incur expenditure, give financial assistance to any person, enter into arrangements or agreements with any person, cooperate with or facilitate with. Anyway, it's very broad, and that might be a good thing given the scale of the issue, but just can you give us a sense of why it's so broad?
Yeah, and I think, as you've mentioned, Chair, very, very broad power, and I think there's just a number of areas to unpack there to hopefully provide a bit of reassurance and maybe a bit of context around why it's so broad. So fundamentally, the first thing to say is that to tackle violence against women and girls needs a whole of executive and a whole of society approach. There's a need for flexibility in delivery, and to have that flexibility in delivery, there needs to be those broad powers. Just a little bit about need and just really the scope and scale of the issue that we're dealing with. I'm sure everyone's aware, but just to give some context, latest statistics from the PSNI, 4 in 5 victims of sexual offences where the gender of the victim is known were female. From the Young Life and Time Survey 2022, 75% of girls experience stress or harassment at least once in their lives. 1 in 2 girls aged 16 receiving an unwanted photo or video at least once. I mean, the scope and scale of this is just, it's fundamental to society to try and address this. So in order to try and address that, as I say, fundamentally, given the scope, it's about flexibility. The current strategic framework and delivery plan highlight actions. They include close partnership working with DE, DOJ, DOH, PSNI, and the broad powers. Then the first aspect of this bill in respect of EVOG is to regularise those powers, to remove the reliance on sole authority and so on, to regularise the current strategic framework that's ongoing. So I think it's very important to say the delivery at the moment requires broad powers, and that is what we're doing. But it's also, and you'll see in the legislation, it mentions future strategies, and it might be that those partners that we have and that we're working with at the minute and working with very well, it might be that new partners come along. It might be that in the duration of this part of the strategy that radical new ways of, as I say, impacting against what's such a substantive issue come along, and therefore we want to have those broad powers. On that point, I think it's also important then to consider the counterfactual. And what I mean by that is, if we were to have overly specific clauses to regularise the spend that we have, and also to try and anticipate what some of those future issues were, it would have the potential to reduce the pace with which we can deliver. And we really want to deliver on these things as fast as we possibly can, because as I say, when we've seen about the need, how important it is. It also might reduce the extent to which we can take advantage of new ideas or new partnerships. And I suppose an example, so in the course of delivery, we identify a new method, a new area of delivery, a new way of seeking to end violence against women and girls or have a significant impact on it. But we can't begin delivery because we don't have the powers, or there's issues with the powers, or it causes a delay, or it in some way stops us from fully capitalising on what the idea is. Now, obviously taking all of that into account, you would say, but what about the risks? What about the risks then of having the broad powers? And Chair, you mentioned, Clause 10, I think, very clearly provides those sort of 4 key reassurances. The Executive Office can't use the Clause 9 power in a case where there's already a provision in legislation which limits its powers. Secondly, the Executive can't exercise Clause 9 in a way that unreasonably duplicates the statutory function or functions of another department. And that really speaks to what I talked about earlier, the delivery with other departments. It may be that some of those processes might change, or a department might decide to move things in the future, but it can only be done with both departments' approval.
You think of an just to sort of interrupt your flow, Gavin, but just for the purpose of getting the record, can you think of are there any specific limiting provisions that came up while this was being drafted, to give a kind of worked example of what that might be?
It's difficult, Chair, to give an envisaged instance of this, and I suppose that does speak to, again, the need for the broad, and there is areas, of delivery in other areas of government where we are very, very clear. Limited provisions would be very apparent. It would be easy to see. I think really the broadness of the bill speaks to the difficulty in thinking what those limited provisions.
To think of it, for example, one of the interventions, an obvious intervention may be perhaps more. I'm sort of, this is touched on in the strategy, but say for one of them was a specific programme or a more focused programme on education of young men, but men and women, in secondary schools, would the obviously the powers over the curriculum that the Education Minister has, would that be a limiting provision on the ability of the Executive Office to say, we want to ensure that there is a specific programme of education on ending violence against women? And by the way, that, I'm not, just to be absolutely clear, that may well be, and I think it is an advisable thing to do. I'm just trying to understand why these powers are so broad and what potential either pitfalls or just process challenges. Is that the kind of thing where you would expect that they wouldn't do that because the Education Minister already has those powers? Or is that not a good example?
I think a number of those sorts of issues would probably be tested when the specifics of the situation came about. One thing I would also say is that it's not just Clause 10. There's a number of other scrutiny and monitoring elements to this, which I think would probably preclude us coming up against. Certainly Clause 10's there. It's there if need be. But for example, if in the example that you're given, there would be a huge amount of other scrutiny and monitoring, and to speak to the scrutiny and monitoring that is available already or is ongoing, and the potential for the future. The strategy itself underwent consultation in July 2023, and there was strong support for the framework that was outlined. It went through all relevant impact assessments. There's a written update twice a year for the executive, and all of these things will come through in that monitoring. The TEO committee, the EVOG team are up in March. That committee, can request papers and data and internal analysis, and potentially preempt some of the issues that you might, have referenced down the line. Junior ministers have chaired meetings of the EVOG oversight group, so there's a huge amount of monitoring and scrutiny that I think plays that key role.
But just I do want to understand this. So I'm going to pick another department example, Justice. And obviously, to be fair, the Justice Minister, this is a priority for the Justice Department and for the whole executive, but and Assembly on various things around, from coercive control in the last mandate through to the various things we've been discussing more recently in terms of statutory provisions. Does this clause give so it says the executive has the power to do anything it considers is appropriate for the purposes of ending violence against in the strategic framework against violence against women and girls. So the strategic framework obviously includes things in relation to the justice system. Would this provision allow the Executive Office simply to say, we are going to, for the sake of argument, introduce new sentencing guidelines and we're just going to do it because this gives us the power to?
I mean, I think, for me it would come down to the term unreasonably duplicates. So it would be a matter for the Department for Justice and the Executive Office. I think, and apologies, it wasn't clear, potentially with some of the monitoring arrangements that we have in place, you would hope that it wouldn't get to that stage because there would be engagement between the departments prior to a point where one department said of the other, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll let you go on there. Gavin, I interrupted you.
No, and so I was just going to come on. So as I say, we've got the clauses, and just to finish off on those, the Executive Office is not empowered by Clause 9 to levy or impose a tax or charge or borrow money and so on. And finally, the Executive Office wouldn't be authorised to disclose information in breach of existing statutes. And then, as I was talking about, just that monitoring, and it probably speaks to the range of consultation and scrutiny and monitoring that we have in place. But also, I think at the end of all of that process, even if we say, look, it's a very broad powers, we've outlined in detail the reasons why we feel the need for the broad powers, the flexibility it provides us, the monitoring that is there, you might still say, why not have a standalone bill? Why not if it is? And what I would simply say is that a new bill would require a full legislative process. There's significant time and resource costs. Adding clauses to an existing bill such as this can serve to accelerate the process. And the process is identifying methods of reducing and impacting upon violence against women and girls. And just one point I want to make on that in terms of delivery. The current strategic framework, the delivery that we have ongoing with the regional and local change funds, you know, some statistics surveys in terms of those funds, 88% of participants after having been part of the process indicated that they'd increased knowledge of the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls issue and strategy and issues around it. 81% have an improved understanding of what healthy relationships are all about. And 85% have an increased confidence in addressing instances of violence against women and girls where they see it. So the strategy is working, but there's no, as I say, indication that in the future there might not be future flexibilities that will allow us to do more. And for that reason, I think the powers are.
Okay. What's the origin of Clause 9? So was this has there been policy work that's gone into developing Clause 9, Clause 8, I should have said. Clause 8, the public appointments one. What is the background to that clause?
I think for the public appointments, as mentioned, you know, fundamentally the issue we have here is one of diversity. And to speak to the issues around diversity for public appointments, again, if we just refer to some statistics, the latest data, those over 50 on boards between the two latest years of the survey, it's increased the number of over 50 on boards from 72% to 75%. So fundamentally, young people are continually underrepresented. We haven't been able to impact that. Gender is positive. There's been a 4% increase in female representation up to 42%, which is great. But again, obviously further work to do there. Ethnic minority and disability figures are running significantly below the wider population. Community background is an even split and it mirrors the wider population, which again is very positive. But fundamentally, it behoves all of us, and it would be an improvement for all of us in terms of the boards that we have in the various areas of delivery, if they are more representative of the society that we live in. So it's just there is no process in train at the moment, but this again, hopefully to preempt some of the issues that have caused these matters to come before and to come onto this bill in the first place. This seeks to give us the flexibility to take advantage of an opportunity that comes along in the future once we are able to create a process.
Basically, it is the general sense is that, and this is something which is, I presume, developed has been around for a while at the civil service level or ministerial level, that the people applying for public appointments aren't so under ethnic minorities, disabled people, and women, though not as much as previously, are underrepresented in public boards.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, there has been an improvement in female representation, but the ethnic and disability, and the over 50, I think, again, it is important for young people as well, and they're just significant underrepresentation from those areas. So anything that we can do.
Okay. And I don't think there'll be those on the asylum and immigration. So that is all happening currently under the sole authority of the Budget Act.
Yeah.
Okay. Is any of the spending on public appointments training happening under sole authority of the Budget Act, or is it just not happening?
There isn't any spend at the moment. There isn't any, I don't think of any significance, and it's just simply that's given us the flexibility of something.
For example, target people, ethnic minority communities, to say why not get involved in? Would that be advertising or trade? It could be both. Yeah,
I mean, it'll be a challenge. I wouldn't want to speak to. We've got a team there. They'll have a lot of ideas on how to develop this process. I think it's something that we'll come back to once we have a programme. As I say, in terms of the context of the clause itself, it just gives us that flexibility.
Okay. There's no Deputy Chair first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming here to speak to all of these points. It is such a wide range of them, and I think in this piece of legislation, as in the previous speakers were in as well, because it's landed with finance, we've kind of got so many different things. We're just trying to get to grips with them all, and I think now that we've seen the complexity of it, I would certainly think a separate administrative bill and a separate financial provision bills would have maybe made it a bit easier to understand the implications of all of the different pieces. But just for complete simplicity and clarity on the clauses that we're talking about from your department, am I right then in saying that clauses 6 and 7 and 9 and 10 are all currently coming through the sole authority of the Budget Act, and it's just 8 and 14 that are new.
Yeah, and as I say, to maybe help in terms of grouping, clause 6, clause 9 and 10, so EVOG and victims is to regularise existing spend, but then also to provide a bit of flexibility going forward. I think that's crucial, and I think it's, both with the victims and survivors programmes that we have and with ending violence against women and girls, hopefully by having these clauses in, so that initial point, sole authority, it's removing that aspect, it's regularising spend that is ongoing. But if we do identify, and we're working very, very hard always on these things, to identify new ways to deliver against those issues, then we can, and we can move quickly. And that's what everybody wants, with the appropriate guardrails that we've mentioned within EVOG, and there is similar within clause 6.
Absolutely. And in terms of those that are moving then from the sole authority of the Budget Act, into this legislation, how much would that be, either in reference to this financial year or last financial year? Do you think then, in terms of spend, will be able to be moved out of that into this?
It's hard to say. I mean, for a number of, obviously, and again, speaking to the flexibility, and we're all aware of the wider financial situation, but moving forward, it's very difficult to say. I mean, what I can say about EVOG, in the last financial year, there was £6 million in the budget. That included 2.2 million that was brought in a monitoring round, with clause 7 on asylum and immigration, but such that that's obviously an accepted matter, administered by Westminster, 3.9 million. Across victims, 11.6 million going to victims groups. But I mean, again, it's not, so that's what it would be now. But again, when we talked earlier about a counterfactual, if we were to receive further funding, in any of these areas, or we would expand any of these areas and so on and so forth, then the impact would be greater, and we can't say, we don't have clarity on that at this stage. Yeah, but that's the figures that we have for.
I think, everyone would agree this is where we want to see, this money being spent in this way, to sort of normalise it and keep it coming through, ministerial responsibility. I just wondered, in terms of the quantum of what's already being spent and sitting that way, how much you thought was coming across. But I don't know, would that be something you would have?
Well, I suppose once we know what 26, 27 looks like and what those figures are, and I mean, well, I just wouldn't want to say that those figures are going to be reflective of that, but it's certainly something that we can provide.
I think it could be a good news story in terms of financial governance. You know what I mean? So it would be really good to know the sort of numbers that we're talking on that, and I think that it would be a good message for the public to say that this has changed in this way.
Yeah, and sorry, just to quickly say on that, because I think there's two key elements of a good news message here. One is the regularisation of existing expenditure from the financial side, but certainly from a personal point of view, from the policy side, that flexibility. If something does come up, we can move a bit quicker. It can seem to the public that we're moving a bit quicker, and I think there's two issues.
Yeah, no, I think it's important at this point to be able to always caveat that the future year's budgets aren't established and we don't have an agreed position as yet, so it's not possible to quote as to what those plans look like at this moment in time, but completely agree.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think, as you say, Gavin, there in clause 6, and then also the 9 and 10, you're talking there about the service for victims, for survivors, and then violence against women and girls, two really strong, powerful things that, the ministers have took a strong lead on and means so much to people. It's really important to see that progress, and to be able to have that power in that direction is really important. And just to your point on the violence against women and girls, like the strategic framework, it was a historic day. Whenever they launched that framework, we were the only jurisdiction in this part of the world that didn't have anything. It was devastating, to see the numbers. Northern Ireland, one of the most dangerous places in the world to be living as a woman, and to see the framework. It was a landmark day, and I think those powers are really important, because when you look at the framework, it's over a 7-year period, and as you say, it's so cross-cutting. It's hitting every single angle of every department. And I also sit in the Public Accounts Committee, and quite often you're looking at the policy pieces and the spend, and the minute that it becomes pigeonholed as a TEO issue, then you've got a problem straight away. So to be able to have that sitting there for First Minister, Deputy First Minister to be able to freely direct that strategic framework and point it into every department is really, really important. And I think that it's good to see that in that way. And hopefully we can see it flow and be maximised and have good impacts on society.
Totally. We can't solve the issues alone with TEO. I mean, the delivery, the partnerships that we've established, again, even in victims and survivors in that area, the regional trauma network working very closely with the Department of Health, those collaborations, it's working together, and hopefully these clauses will give us the flexibility to help us do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sure. Okay, we'll now bring in Jerry Carroll. Jerry?
Yeah, thanks for the update. I have 3 quick questions. In terms of victims and survivors stuff, so through either the HIA bill or kind of through this bill, could you maybe detail any work ongoing to ensure that records are being protected by religious institutions or those who are being accused of serious malpractice?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that's covered through these clauses. Obviously, there would be criminal justice and other issues around that. I would just say that broadly, the clauses that we have in respect to victims and survivors is about supporting those victims. The other wider issues around it that you've alluded to there, as I say, would be a matter for specific investigations and so on, but the clause here is really about widening out, regularising the payments and services and support to victims of historical and institutional abuse, and then also providing flexibility to provide those services to others going forward.
Okay, thanks. And just on that, I mean, have you done any work to ensure that organisations that were complicit or accused of being complicit in sort of abuse and malpractice and other things, like aren't getting availing of any support? So obviously there's a lot of religious institutions who are guilty of really serious, heinous crimes, and other non-religious institutions. And I think not only would it be sort of a bad look if they were receiving funding, but also I'd imagine for many victims it would be appalling. So I'm presuming that work is done to ensure they're not getting any funding through this, but just wanted to ask it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it speaks to the, maybe some of the points we made earlier about how, in general, if you broaden out bills and broaden out clauses, it could have unintended consequences or unintended issues. All I would speak to on that point is, we have the oversight, the processes all the way through. When we're designing any new or additional services, they all go through business cases and oversight, and TEO committee has oversight and so on. So that would prevent the issues that you've mentioned from happening, or certainly attempt to mitigate them.
Okay, and obviously things may develop, but you'd be confident, just to clarify, that at the minute, and there's none of those organisations are availing of this funding?
No, I mean, it's not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. The final one is obviously, as mentioned in the briefing, like immigration is obviously a reserve matter, but obviously there's some coordination powers, if that's the best way, for TEO generally, and that's being tidied up in this bill and being moved from budget bills to here. Is there any, can you maybe detail what powers TEO will have or does have at the minute? Because there's been serious questions raised about mayors in particular, from my perspective, about moving people out quite quickly of accommodation when they get settled status. Neighbours of mine and people right across the constituency, they built up homes, they built up communities, and then they get their status. They're no longer seeking asylum. They're happy obviously with that, but then they're told to move to go on a waiting list or to go to the northwest if they're living in Belfast, and that's causing all manner of havoc and chaos for them. So that's just a general point I want to raise. But can you maybe detail what power or what measures TEO does have? Because I know they have regular enough meetings with mayors. Is there anything that they can do to kind of raise these issues, or to compel mayors or any other provider to make sure that they're operating as they should be?
Yeah, I mean, just 2 points. I'll address the specific issue in a second. Just to say, more generally, for the benefit, there is that potential frustration around the fact that immigration policy is an accepted matter. It is administered by Westminster. That does limit some elements of maybe some of the broader elements of the issues that you're raising. TEO has responsibility for coordinating services and support for those arriving. I mean, that support does include welcome arrangements, advice and signposting. Any specific instances of issues around those services. You know, it's certainly just directing it to the specific area, you know, so within the Asylum and Immigration Support Services team, you know, just any specific issues around that. This bill's obviously wider. It's just about regularising those issues. There's no specific clauses pertaining to the points that you've made, but that is just simply a service delivery issue, and that can be handled by specific communication with the team.
Okay, thanks. A lot of these issues have been raised by myself and others, but maybe we'll include TO more in the correspondence going ahead. But thanks for those answers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Harry Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. With respect to clause 14, could you provide examples of circumstances in which appointing a commissioner for less than 5 years would be necessary or beneficial?
Well, I mean, it's just simply as we've outlined. You know, the HIA Act provides, you know, it's specifically for a 5-year period. We undertook an independent review of the service. It was decided that the service would go on for a period of less than 5 years, and therefore it's just simply an administrative clause to allow us to have that in for less than 5 years, and it's just simply.
And will the length of appointment be made public at the time of appointment? Reasons be provided where a term of less than 5 years is chosen?
Well, I mean, as I say, I suppose again it speaks to the more general point about regularising and flexibility. The regularisation aspect is that the current for Corsica current duration is December 2027. Again, anything in the future that would be in terms of where we are and thoughts around commissioners and the wider role of commissioners.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Brian Kingston.
Just to ask about clause 8 for people to obtain skills and experience to hold public appointments. Can you provide more detail of what sort of appointments are in mind here with public boards, whatever, or just can you give some examples of what is intended?
Well, I suppose, you know, again, we don't have a new programme yet. So I suppose what the clause simply wants to give TO the power to do is to give it flexibility, because we don't know how it might be delivered, and so it just gives us the flexibility. So you could say, for example, that there was a specific mode of delivery that we felt would address some of the issues around number of over 50s, gender, ethnic minorities and disability, and then this clause just gives us the flexibility to do that. But again, we don't have an envisaged instance because, you know, there hasn't been, we haven't got to the end of that process yet.
Right. Okay. I was just trying to understand what sort of board, what sorts of positions. Okay. But positions ultimately are made on merit.
You know, oversight boards, public boards, any boards where we're inviting, you know, public appointments to be made.
But ultimately, appointments are made on merit.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, just one final question for me relating, going back to the clause on victims and survivors. If I can bring the bill up again. So, just on victims, so it, from HIA victims, so clause 6, sorry, support services for victims and survivors. It says under clause, so 6.3, it lists, it says an individual is a victim and survivor if the individual A is a victim and survivor for the purposes of Part 2 of the Historical Institutional Abuse Northern Ireland Act, was a resident of a relevant institution within the meaning of Section 4 of the Preservation of Document Act. C is a child of someone within paragraph B, i.e. the preceding paragraph. D is within such other description as may be prescribed in regulations made by the Executive Office, and those regulations would be brought forward by negative resolution, meaning the Department would have the ability to change them without it going to the Assembly. Can you give us a sense of who such people might be or why such a power is included?
Yeah, and you know, as I say, it really speaks to the process in that, you know, this regularisation is around an expansion of services. So whenever we first created legislation around victims and survivors, it was around victims and survivors who from the Troubles conflict. Okay, and in terms of the need there, you know, for example, Northern Ireland Life and Times survey 29% of people felt that their mental health had been impacted by Troubles conflict. But in 2021, Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, who play a key role to provide advice for policy, conducted a survey. 24% of people surveyed had direct experience of trauma or loss in areas outside of the Troubles conflict. And, you know, that speaks to HIA, speaks to mother and baby homes. This just provides flexibility for an occasion where, through the development of policy, other victims and survivors are identified and there's a process undertaken. Obviously, we can't speak to what that might look like yet, and it's just to provide the flexibility so that in the future we don't come back to try and regularise spend again.
It could be a victim and survivor of, it wouldn't have to be HIA, it wouldn't have to be the Troubles, it could be sort of anything.
Well, just to confirm that victims of historical institutional abuse, mother and baby homes, we're regularising the spending that has been ongoing, so that, as you say, it wouldn't count for that. It would just be if, through the development of policy, other categories of victims and survivors are, we see that as part of a wider programme.
Other categories of victims and survivors of historical institutional abuse or of anything in general?
Depending on the development of policy.
A broad power. It feels like quite a broad power to introduce victim services. I'm not like because given the department isn't yet able to conceptualise what that might be, it feels quite broad.
Yeah, and I suppose one point on that as well, because I think, you know, and it was brought up, you know, not only is in the context of, you know, the opinion that it's broad, it's also negative resolution.
Yes.
The process would be brought in by negative resolution. So just again, it's about what assurances would we have in place. You know, there's very strong oversight and governance when we bring in new programmes, especially in this area. You know, there's a lot of oversight. Again, we're talking, you know, your business cases, ministerial approval, and so on. Very frequently, DSO guidance is sought. It was obviously sought for these clauses. And negative resolution, you know, the Assembly can still act. Obviously, time period is truncated, but, you know, mentioned the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, we have that oversight process as well, the TO committee and so on. So yes, there's flexibility in the powers. We want to act quickly if we identify new issues where we feel we can make a positive difference, but we feel we have a lot of oversight and governance in place to provide reassurance.
That's all. The oversight and governance is not, very little of that is, it would, by negative, a regulation would come before the Executive Office Committee, I presume, if you were trying to, it's just that it wouldn't be affirmative procedure, so it wouldn't be a vote. So a future TO committee could pray against it if it said something that they found questionable or they wanted more information, but it wouldn't have to be voted on for the Assembly. And it just feels like quite an open-ended power to be introduced without. Okay.
I mean, as you know, as I say, fundamentally from a policy perspective, we would say, you know, the oversight is there so that before it got to the stage where that issue had occurred, it would have been, you know, worked through.
Okay. But that's all, as it were, internal oversight, as in that's policy development inside the department rather than external scrutiny by MLAs or indeed third parties. Okay. I think that's helpful. I think we've covered most of the issues we need to, unless anybody else wishes to come in. There are a huge range of clauses there. I think we've shed a bit of light on why the department wishes to use some of them in most cases, and we understand it a bit better. We may correspond more if we need further information as we continue. I might just ask briefly on the FTC. Do you want to clarify quickly for us, Ronan, what the FTC does powers for and what you're...
Well, essentially, just to probably should clarify from the outset, the clauses actually aren't TU wasn't bringing forward the clauses within the regulation, so these are being within the bill. It's being brought forward by Department of Finance
yes.
and Department for the Economy. So it is those departments that are seeking to regularise the position, to put the legal veras in place so that they can offer FTC loans and can lend in respect of their policy delivery. So
DOF can.
Yeah, DOF and DFE at the moment can't.
So of course in DFE, yeah.
So at the moment, by virtue of the fact that the legal veras wide powers rest with SIB as a workaround, SIB administer via TEO FTC in respect of those two departments, which was to be until these clauses would be put in place. So this is the first opportunity that there's been to regularise that position. So putting that in place will improve transparency and regularity. The spend will sit with those departments in terms of the policy delivery for those areas.
It's not supposed to be spend, I suppose, is that right? And technically, is it spend?
Well, so
the accounting will go.
The accounting for the loans and various transactions associated with it, such as amortisation and so forth.
That's great, thank you very much. And hopefully, maybe there'll be. I won't make a joke about funding car parks because I'll get in trouble for it. But anyway, I've made my point about FTC. Right, that's really helpful. Thank you both. Cheers. We appreciate that. Thank you, members. And thank you to Ronan and Gavin for coming and giving us that briefing. As I say, we'll correspond if we need to raise any further questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, members, we've got. Yes, if members are agreed, we will flag to the Executive Office Committee, send them the Hansard for today's transcript, encourage them if there's any issues that they've kind of not investigated in immense detail to feel that they are more than entitled to ask their own department questions about some of those things. But anyway, I think there are still some questions that we'll want to probe a bit more either in this committee or as individual MLAs. Agenda item 8 is public procurement reform, ports exemption, procurement amendment regulations 2026. We're doing an oral briefing from the department. We'll try and keep this one relatively concise, but if members are content, we'll have Hansard provide an oral, a transcript. It's page 184 of the meeting pack. There's a clerk's memo, there's a clerk's memo, and also there is correspondence from the Department on the Procurement Amendment Regulations. It's page 188. A briefing paper from the Department of Finance on the Cabinet Office proposals for public procurement reform, which is page 198. A briefing paper from the Department on a possible exemption of ports from procurement legislation, which is at page 207. The explanatory memorandum for the Procurement Act 23, which is a page which we've discussed before. That's at page 212. So welcome Sharon Smith, who's the Deputy Secretary from CPD, and Paul Brown, who's the Deputy Director of Policy and Performance. Thank you both very much for coming. Sharon, do you want to give us a brief opening statement, and then members indicate if you want to ask questions.
Thank you, Chair, Deputy Chair and members for the invitation to provide a briefing on Cabinet Office's proposed legislative reforms for public procurement and the potential exemptions of ports from existing procurement legislation. You've already introduced Paul. Paul's role requires collaboration and close working relationships with Cabinet Office and the devolved administration on public procurement matters. Firstly then, on the proposed procurement legislative reforms, the most recent changes to the procurement legislations commenced on the 24th of February 2025, and that was with the introduction of the Procurement Act 23 and the implementing legislation, which was the Procurement Regulations 2024. The procurement training on the new regulations has been completed, and the new legislation is continuing to bed in as more and more new competitions are being taken forward. As of the end of last week, just under 12,000 new tender notices have been published across England, Wales and here, and over 700 of those are attributed to local public bodies here. In June 2025, then, the Cabinet Office launched a consultation on the proposed reforms, seeking to further amend public procurement law with proposals contained within the Procurement Economic Security Bill. The consultation closed on the 12th of September 2025 with 800 responses received. You received details of the 7 proposed reforms in November, so I'm just going to give you a very high-level policy intent for each of the reforms, and I'm happy to take any further questions during the session. The first proposed reform then was on social value, which is intended to give more emphasis to social value in procurements to ensure suppliers deliver commitments that contribute to the government's key priorities. The second is safeguarding strategic domestic supply chains to enable contracting authorities to award contracts deemed critical for economic security in a way that safeguards local strategic supply chains and sovereign capabilities, promotes regional and national economic growth, and prioritises domestic suppliers in certain critical sectors. The third provides flexibilities to award contracts directly for health and social services, to provide contracting authorities with considerable flexibility when procuring health and social services deemed to be people-focused services, including making it easier to award contracts without competition. The fourth is about strengthening sanctions for contractors who cannot demonstrate prompt payment of their supply chains and subcontractors, and this is to encourage suppliers on major contracts to pay their subcontractors promptly and reduce payment times. The fifth is about introducing targets for spend with SMEs, which will require large contracting authorities to publish direct spend targets with small and medium-sized enterprises and voluntary community and social enterprises. And the sixth is introducing a public interest test before outsourcing services over 5 million. And then the last is increased payment transparency, which really only applies to Section 70 of the Procurement Act, which doesn't apply to this jurisdiction, so any amendments on that will not affect us. Public procurement, as you're probably really aware, is a devolved matter. However, procurement legislation is primarily drafted to align with the World Trade Organisation's Government Procurement Agreement. Therefore, as trade is a reserved matter, we have historically joined with England and Wales in the UK public procurement legislation, which is really helpful to provide consistency for suppliers who are tendering across the UK. However, the proposed reforms that Cabinet Office have brought forward are not specifically linked to trade, and therefore our jurisdiction can decide whether it wants to participate with this or not. Cabinet Office have requested a decision on whether this jurisdiction will in principle join in with these reforms, and this in principle agreement would be made on the basis that our jurisdiction could withdraw agreement if, as the policy development evolves, the proposed bill would bring this jurisdiction into conflict with the Executive's existing procurement policy or would not be beneficial to our local economy or suppliers. As public procurement is a cross-cutting matter, the Minister has written to his executive colleagues seeking their views on his consideration of the proposed reforms. In terms of next steps for the reforms, Cabinet Office has confirmed they are still in draft format, so they are subject to further change. Cabinet Office was intending to bring forward the draft legislation this year in 2026. However, we have been informed very recently that the earliest the legislation is likely to be brought forward will be autumn 2027. Following executive agreement on how they want us to propose, we will continue to engage with Cabinet Office and will inform you of any key developments.
Okay.
Are you happy for me to move on to the port exemptions?
Yes.
Just very, very briefly.
Yep.
So in relation to the potential exemptions of ports from existing procurement legislation, this is still being considered by Cabinet Office, and they're working with their colleagues in the Department for Transport. If an exemption was brought forward, this would be via secondary legislation, amending the Procurement Act under Section 6, which allows appropriate authorities to exempt utility activities if they are satisfied that the activities take place within fair and effective market competition, and entry to that market is unrestricted. As you will note from the briefing we gave you in November, there are 5 commercial seaports here: Belfast, Larne, Foyle, Warrenpoint and Coleraine. And following the consultation with the local ports by the Department for Infrastructure, they are satisfied that there may be merit in those ports being exempted from the regulations alongside their GB counterparts. So DFI colleagues are in the process of seeking agreement from their Minister about the way forward. In terms of timing, again, Cabinet Office is aiming to have a final position towards the end of February 26. And if this is the case, that the regulations are going to exempt ports, they will look to have these led by the end of this year. If Cabinet Office brings forward the regulations, agreement from this jurisdiction to be included in the ports exemption would be sought from the Finance Ministry through formal Minister-to-Minister letters. And I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sharon. On the first, and members indicate you wish to ask a question, just so we're clear, the broad question of the broad public procurement reform and a potential new secondary or primary legislation.
It's an economic security bill,
Primary
so
legislation.
it's primary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically at least 18 months off.
Yeah.
Okay. So at the minute, what the Finance Minister is doing is seeking very initial views from his executive counterparts as to whether they want to go along with being, what would it be, an LCM in all probability, or just a kind of, yeah.
And at the minute, it's really just in-principle agreement because they are still in draft and they are subject to change. So the in-principle agreement gives us the ability to sit in those discussions about how they're being formed. Without that, we are really just getting update from Cabinet Office.
Does the Minister have a preference? Has he expressed a view?
That was with his executive colleagues, so he's put his proposals on how he would suggest we move forward to his executive colleagues.
Can you tell us what that recommendation is?
They're with the executive, so...
That's a wee bit like we're not getting, not that this is you, but if It's okay. It's hard. In one sense, I think it's hard for the committee to have. I understand there's an executive discussion, but it's hard for the committee to have given that the minister has published a multi-year budget, which isn't yet agreed by the executive. Somewhat strange that we can't be told his preference on a hypothetical procurement reform happening in 18 months, but we can have. But that's me. I'm not asking you to comment on that because
there are 7 reforms, and each of those will have their own merits. So it's on the basis of, and again. You've been quite right to say, we have devolved policy and we can develop our own legislation. So ministers' decisions will be on, would this be best to go alongside reforms that Cabinet Office are taking forward, or would it be better that that our jurisdiction has its own methods of bringing these forward? So each of those will have their own merits about whether it's that, because we have to understand that our supply base is completely different to England. We have like over 80% of our businesses are micro businesses, which is not the same in England, so we have to be very mindful that some of the reforms that are proposed might not suit our sectors specifically.
And are you examining any potential sort of cross-border impacts and how that might interact with the protocol or Windsor framework?
They're always under consideration for any reforms,
Well, I suppose we'd ask that we are kept abreast of those discussions, given we don't really know what the minister's view is or yet much about the UK government's position, but it's helpful to know that there is at least a discussion, this is an agenda that's moving forward on the ports. What is the view of the department? That is going to happen more soon, we think?
The Cabinet Office are currently weighing up their options based on their own analysis, and we are primarily involved in this because powers within the Procurement Act will be used to exempt ports, which are the responsibility of DFI.
Again, the question is whether the executive agrees with that position and therefore agrees for for the UK government to legislate on Northern Ireland's behalf to remove the ports from procurement regulations, and that is it will be DFI owning the policy of the ports.
And DFI have a paper with their minister for consideration on the way forward, and once that is through from the minister, then that's where the engagement with Cabinet Office will be under.
Agree position on that one, as it were?
No, I don't have any idea.
Fair enough. And then the final one, which is the procurement amendment regulations, is there an executive position on that one yet? Do we have has the executive opined on that and whether it's?
Well, the amendment regulations in themselves are very, very technical in nature and don't cut across any policies or don't require any decisions in any policies or any options. So the Finance Minister has provided his approval for that on that basis. I mean, they're very
technical.
Yeah.
And most of them are correcting things that just aren't being implemented the way it was intended.
Okay, we're ringing colleagues now. Deputy Chair first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for being here on this. The Chair has kind of touched on what I was going to ask. It's just really around the financial governance on the ports exemption. So in terms of, obviously it's one of these ones where, Department of Finance, you're here as CPD, and that sort of centralised role that will do procurement for Department of Infrastructure. So just where the ports are, if it's progressed here and the ports are exempt from the procurement, what is the financial governance and procurement governance? What's the structure there? Will that just be, and I think you sort of alluded to it a bit, it'll sit with Department for Infrastructure then to come back and satisfy you as to how procurement was achieved?
This is actually a really strange one. The ports don't do, so DFI does not do procurement for ports. A lot of the ports are actually privately owned. Some of them, the DFI can provide loans and grants, but they do not do any procurement activity. It really is a really strange one that they're caught under the Act, which is why when the new Act was being brought forward, the ports in England, who are much larger and have got much more commercial activity, said, look, why are we being bound by this? And that's where this consultation has come forward. Is there anything else you want to add, Paul?
No, just that based on the market assessments that you maybe be concerned that the legislation doesn't apply to them, but it's quite clear that they already operate in a very commercial environment where value for money and such matters are of prime concern to the ports.
Yeah. And Warren Point Harbour being within my constituency, but the one I'm most familiar with the operations of it. So I know because it's not absorbed the way like road service or anything is, it's not sitting within the departmental structure, so then there's not that accountability then of the minister as such.
No, and the only sort of sanction would be if they breach. At the minute, if they breach the Act, then an aggrieved supplier can take them through the courts. That wouldn't come back to a department. That is simply because they're being caught under the legislation. But you can see from the paper that we provided to you that they're citing a lot of benefits of not being caught by the Act, and that's reducing costs for both the ports and suppliers, speeding up procurement, providing greater flexibility, agility and innovation in port procurement, allowing increased commercial discretion, encouraging greater investment in ports, and improving the interaction between buyers and suppliers and making it easier for small suppliers and new entrants to participate.
Whenever they're trading and operating that way, it does make sense. So you're saying there's no risk here effectively then to the public purse by this exemption being in place. It's just trading as they are.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, happy enough to Brian Kingston.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your attendance. And I mean, I would comment first about just the sterling work of Belfast Harbour. I think just the expansion they've had over recent years and the investment in the harbour state is first class, not just in the port activities, but the office developments and so on at City Quays, and it's a shining light in the city. In terms of, your paper refers to both GB and Northern Ireland ports applying for this exemption. Do you have any information on what the rate of ports in GB seeking exemption is? Are the majority seeking exemption? Is it the standard request?
It was, I think it's 27, is it?
Yep.
27
port owners or operators, 9 ship owners responded to the survey, and all have asked that they be exempted.
27
in the mainland.
All of them, basically.
27 port owners and 9 ship owners or operators responded to a survey that was carried out by Department for Transport.
And is that virtually all ports in GB?
Yes.
It is all.
And the initial assessment was done following a request from the ports and the formal ports authority that they be exempted.
Right. Okay. So that seems to be the preferred option across the board. And I'm cautious about asking, but is the Windsor framework then, does that have any bearing on Northern Ireland ports following suit, or is the pathway clear for them, or is that likely to create obstacles?
It hasn't been brought up in discussions, and because this is about how ports operate, it would be difficult to see how it could, but as this develops, we will certainly, and DFI are obviously taking the lead in terms of the consultation and bringing forward the proposals. Really, the Procurement Act is just the vehicle, pardon the pun, for doing that, to bring that forward. But we will certainly, that's always a consideration when any change is going through.
Okay. But no legislation is required locally then? This is Westminster legislation. So do we have any role in this as such then? Are we just keeping ourselves informed, or?
Go ahead.
Secondary legislation will be brought forward through the Act if Cabinet Office first agree to pursue these exemptions and then write to the Finance Minister on the advice from DFI and their own market assessment, their own summaries. We will then proceed.
Ports would apply through our own departments, would they? No.
The DFI have already done a market assessment. We were not in receipt of that, and based on that they've put advice up to their own minister, so they've contacted the ports. They've done an all-island assessment as well on the impact across the border, and that is currently with the DFI minister. So if Cabinet Office formalise this agreement in the coming months, we will then seek approval from DFI as to how they'd like to proceed. But the Finance Minister is responsible because of the vehicle they're using to exempt the ports, which is the Procurement Act.
Okay, so the ports have formally applied, but the Finance Minister has to submit that?
They've responded to the DFI market assessment and all wish to be exempt, yes.
Okay. And I suppose the impact on the ports is that if this comes through, they just don't have to comply with the procurement regulations going forward. So it just simplifies how they take about their commercial operations and how they buy goods, services and works.
And it's probably in your briefing, what's the expected timescale for the legislation at Westminster?
End of this year, I think it's the end of 2026 you're still hoping for. Now, in saying that this is all being considered by Cabinet Office, we haven't had the final decision on whether they are proceeding with possible exemptions, so they're hoping to conclude that discussion by the end of January.
End of January and start of February.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm sure we'll keep an eye on this.
Yep, we'll keep you informed.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Well, look, I think no one else has indicated that they wish to come in. So, members, thank you for that. Thank you, officials. Thanks, Sharon and Paul, for giving us that update. So, can I suggest we kept abreast of both the broader procurement reform agenda, which may not crystallise in this mandate, let alone this year, and also on the port exemption as that develops, which again is not certain, but it's helpful to get at least an indication that it's on the way. And then on the regulations, we will, I suppose, expect those at some point when they are agreed finally by the executive.
The
amendment regulations, they will come before us.
No, they've already gone. They've
gone to the
agreed,
executive.
they're just corrections. They're just technical corrections.
Will they have to come as secondary legislation to this committee at some point? No, because they're SI. Okay.
Yep.
There you go. Well, thank you for coming and giving us.
We're
Okay.
not included.
That's fine. Well, it's helpful to understand, of course. So, well, we are kept abreast as this agenda continues. I don't think we have any follow-up information we're due to ask for. No. So we will, members, if people are content, we will send the transcript of this discussion in due course to the Infrastructure Committee and flag to them anything else arising. Thank you, Sharon and Paul, for coming to us.
Thank you.
Now, members, we're going to move on to agenda item 9, and again, Hansard will transcribe if people are content. That is the LCM on the Public Office Accountability Bill, consideration of the committee report. So, the committee report is, if you go to page 24 of your tabled pack. Is it page 24 of the tabled pack?
24, yeah.
My table pack's only 16 pages long.
I know.
23, 24, yeah.
Hang on. Unless I've got the. I'm in the January 2020 committee pack, and clearly talk about living in the past.
It's just, I don't recognise any of those papers.
No, indeed. Yeah, the clerk. It's back when.
Maybe another week. But
Back when Jim Allister and Jim Walsh were on the committee with me. Anyway, yeah. So members, the committee previously asked the Department of Finance to consider the responses to departmental engagement with stakeholders and level of risk for the LCM as referenced in the executive. This reflects the comments received from each department on their own stakeholder engagement, as well as reflecting the executive paper in general. So, members, I'm just going to open it up for discussion. I think it's probably worth saying, first of all, that clearly this is a subject of very live political debate in London for very obvious and important reasons. So I'm just going to open it up to discussion. Does any member wish to come in and comment on this? So you will see there there are a range of individual issues. Some departments, including DERA, did not raise any particular issues. DOJ, for I'm just giving an example, raised some potential additional workloads created. DOH, confirmed the stakeholder feedback had not highlighted any issues which would dissuade the department from supporting the extension of this bill to Northern Ireland, although there's a separate issue around medical candour, which is a subject of very live debate in that world. But DFI, anyway, so you will have seen the various bits of feedback. So members, at last week's meeting, the committee discussed the LCM members did indicate there were gaps in the information needed by the committee to reach a decision to support the Minister in seeking consent for the bill, excluding Part 4, to legislate on behalf of the Executive Department in what are devolved areas. Members also agreed to seek detail from the Department of Finance on how Part 4 of the bill would be managed in Northern Ireland, including further detail on what exactly is being excluded from the LCM led by the Department on the 19th of December 2025, for example, in terms of public offices, specifically whether MI5 and the NCA should be and would be included in the duty of candour. Now, members will also be discussion aware of developments in respect of the bill this week, including the fact that the next stage of the bill, which was due to happen either this week or next, is now not going to happen and has been pulled. I suggest that we will go into a quick closed session just to discuss our final report, because there are clearly concerns in London and concerns elsewhere about this. So if members can help, we'll go into closed session and discuss our report. Okay, we're back in open session. So, members, per our discussion, a couple of things. One, we are, I think, agreed in a previous agreement, which is that we cannot come to a conclusion about this LCM, or indeed the broader bill, albeit there was earlier expressed broad support for the principle of the bill. Clearly, there is now a pretty chaotic and confused position at Westminster around the status of this bill. That means that, given the position, the relatively late notice in terms of the executive's response to this, we have not been able to provide any real serious detailed scrutiny on this as an LCM. Therefore, our report will have to reflect, the draft report you've discussed in closed session reflects that fact, describes the chronology, this process of scrutiny that we have gone through, and also the fact that we can't arrive at a final position. We will insert a paragraph at the end reflecting on the updated confusion, as it were, the latest confusion on the position re the Westminster Bill. We will not, as previously mentioned, settle on a position in relation to the committee. Should this LCM ever reach the floor of the Northern Ireland Assembly, members and parties individually will take their position. The executive, I presume, will have a position at that stage. It does have a position now, but we will find out whether that remains the position and they actually move the LCM. For the purposes of the record, this, I think, draws attention once again to the problems in the LCM process, whereby we are, the executive has agreed to this. We have not been able to provide any particularly detailed scrutiny on this, but we are now obliged, because of standing orders, which are very precise, because an LCM has been laid, we have to provide a committee report within a set time frame. So we will have to provide a committee report, even if that committee report is partial and does not contain anywhere near the requisite scrutiny. Members, having said all that, we're going to seek agreement to publish any additional information that we've received as an addendum to the committee report, and we are also going to reserve the position in respect of supporting the Minister of Finance and seeking the Assembly's endorsement of the legislative consent motion, which reads as follows: that this committee endorses the principle of the extension of Northern Ireland to the provisions of the Public Office Accountability Bill. The committee will not be taking a position on that and will be reserving its position in respect of supporting the Minister of Finance on that. So we're going to have to agree our draft report, which, as I said, will be of possibly limited use in scrutiny terms, but is an obligation of ours under standing orders. So, members, it starts at page 26 of the tabled pack. There was an earlier version in the meeting pack, which was updated to reflect the most recent response from the department. We are going to update it again, as I said, to insert a further paragraph at the end, what is now paragraph 29, and this will become a paragraph 30. Any typographical or formatting errors will, as always, be amended, so don't worry about those. So members, do any members have any proposed amendments, notwithstanding the ones we've discussed in closed session? Any other further amendments? No. Okay, if there are no further amendments, members, we're going to just proceed through the report, seeking the committee's formal agreement to the report as drafted. So, so here we go. So, first off, title page, committee membership and powers, table of contents, and list of abbreviations. Members, you can see that in front of you. I'm going to put the question: are members content the title page, committee membership, and powers page stand part of the report? Agreed? Agreed. Background section, the background section is paragraph 1 to 12. Are members content that the background section stand part of the report? Content? Purpose of the legislative consent motion section. Now, members, are you content that the purpose of the legislative consent motion section, which is paragraph 13, stands part of the report? Sorry, it's at paragraph 13. Are members content that the purpose of the legislative consent motion stand part of the report? Content? Yep. Yeah. Committee consideration of the LCM set. So, members, that's at paragraphs 14 to 29. Are members content that the committee consideration of the legislative consent motion of the report, paragraphs 14 to 29, stand part of the report? Content? Conclusion, that's at paragraph 30. It's at paragraph 30 now. It may be paragraph 31 whenever we amend it, but for now, are members content that the conclusion stand part of the report? Content. Appendices, members, the appendices at page 331 of the meeting pack. These will be updated in due course, we said, with Hansard transcripts of today's deliberations and minutes of proceedings, such as they were. So, members, are you content that the appendices stand part of the report? Content. Okay. So, members, are we content for the report to be published on the committee's webpage and the link issued to all MLAs in advance of the debate of the LCM, should it ever happen? There is an indicative debate time to the debate currently of mid-February, but that may change on the basis of things currently. Okay, are we all content with that? Yeah. Okay, so members, that is a slightly strange academic exercise, but we've done it now, and obviously parties and individuals will investigate further that issue. Okay, so agenda item 10 is Fiscal Council Bill Committee deliberations. Go to page 333 of the meeting pack, please. Members will find correspondence from the Audit Office outlining its position on provisions of the bill. So members, are we agreed to add this response to the evidence base for the committee stage of the bill, clause by clause in e-bill folder? Content? So members, I'm going to ask for agreement on potentially seeking oral evidence from the NIAO, which I think is not a bad idea. Members are content given they are, other than the Fiscal Council, which also already exists, they're the closest thing in statute that is long standing to the Fiscal Council. So if members are content, we seek an agreement. And obviously it would be helpful for us to unpack how they might see working with the Fiscal Council, which I'm sure they've done a bit of thus far. Members content? Yeah, we'll agree that. Page 339 of the meeting pack, there's a response from the Treasury Committee regarding its engagement with the OBR. The Treasury Committee has recently launched an inquiry into the OBR and indicated that comment would be more appropriately provided as that inquiry progresses. However, in terms of general scrutiny of the OBR, it holds pre-appointment hearings for 3 members of the Budget Responsibility Committee. TSC has a statutory veto on appointment and dismissal to these positions. It also sees the OBR after each fiscal event to discuss forecasts for the economy and public finances. The committee also takes evidence on the OBR's other publications, such as its fiscal risks report, when they are published. So that's useful. Members are content we add that to the evidence base for the committee stage. At last week's meeting, the committee considered further correspondence from the Scottish Finance Committee, Finance and Public Accounts Committee. It's the Finance and Public Accounts Committee, if I got that right?
It's Finance and Public Accounts, it is.
Read the bill. Departmental officials have requested sight of this correspondence. So if members are agreed, we'll send that to officials. Agreed.
Chair, it's public administration.
Public administration.
Right.
I thought
yes,
that there were. I didn't want to offend Kenneth and his counterparts in the committee.
Yeah, should be.
We're seeing them soon. Yes.
Call with them soon.
Yes. So members, we're going to go on to delegated legislation, which is agenda items 11 and 12. There are 2 SL1s today in the pack. They're subject to a new process introduced on the 5th of January 2026. So we need to seek agreement on the new process before the SL1s, before talking about the SL1s. So that new process aims to improve committee scrutiny. Departments will now provide information on proposed statutory Departments will now provide information about proposed statutory rules in a new template, which is more detailed. Departments must also provide drafts of the proposed statutory rule and explanatory memorandum within their SL1 paper. Committees will now call for views on the proposed SR through an online survey. It is not intended to be a consultation. This is a short 3-question survey that will ask for views on the accuracy and completeness of the proposed rule and whether there are any unintended or unanticipated consequences associated with the proposal. Committees will not formally consider the SL1 until at least 4 weeks after submitted by the Department, unless there are exceptional circumstances. So the clerk may want to tell us more about this.
Chair, this is a new procedure, as you've said. We have now got our first couple of SL1s entering into this procedure because they received after the 5th of January. Members may well have come across this in other committees because they're already into the procedure if they met last week or if they met the week before and they already had SL1s. Members may also see in some committees where you've got 2 SL1s being dealt with differently because one might have been received over the Christmas recess and one has been received since the 5th of January, so they'll be subject to the old process and then one will be subject to the new process. As the Chair has said, this is for greater public transparency as well, where the delegated legislation process is probably a bit of a mystery to the outside world. It's done very much within the Assembly and very much within committee. This kind of opens that up. It pops it onto citizen space. And it'll be interesting then for the committee to be able to see if there's any responses and take those into account. So we've carved out a 4-week period for that. So we will see the SL1, we'll note it, we put it out for the period on the citizen space. Then it comes back for members to consider plus any kind of response we've had, and then we proceed as normal towards SR stage.
Okay, so members, we first of all, we need to agree to issue the survey. So, members, we agree that we will issue a call for views for each of these SL1s that we're talking about today, using the standard survey, publish the SL1 and relevant documents from the department on our website. Are we agreed to that?
Thank you.
Second, we need to agree that committee staff seek information from the department where necessary on matters raised during each SL1. Are we agreed to that? Yes. And then we also agreed that we will publish any responses received to the committee for each SL1. Agreed to that?
Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll now move to the first SL1 we're going to discuss, which is agenda item 11, the Pensions Increase Review Order, Northern Ireland 2026. Members, you will not be asked to make a decision about the policy merit of this proposed statutory rule today. The papers are at page 346, along with a clerk's memo, alongside a clerk's memo on the pensions increase review order at page 346, an SL1 letter from the department at page 347, a policy screening document at 351, a draft statutory rule at 378, and a draft explanatory memorandum at page 382. So, members, the purpose of the proposed statutory rule is to fulfil the department's obligation to provide by order an increase of 3.8% in the rates of Northern Ireland public service pensions in payment and deferred pensions with effect from April 26. So, members, so as to note that we are simply at this stage noting receipt of the SL1 proposed statutory rule, and that these will be published as part of the call for views on the proposal. We will then consider it at 18th February meeting on the 18th of February 2026. Are they content that briefing is not necessary at this stage? We may seek a briefing later on, or may not, but we may seek one. But people content to note all of those things for now. The next SL1 relates to public service pensions, a revaluation order 2026. Again, you're not going to be asked to comment on the policy merit. There are papers at page 386. One is a memo on the public service pensions revaluation order, SL1 letter, which is page 387 from the department, screening document page 391, draft statutory rule 415, and draft explanatory memorandum at 417. The purpose of this proposed statutory rule is for an increase an increase used for the career average revalued earnings public service pension schemes for the purpose of revaluing active members' pension benefits. The order will specify an increase in prices of 3.8% based on the published annual change in CPI. The specified increase in earnings will be 4.6% based on the published figure for average weekly earnings. So, members, we just have to note receipt of this at this point, and that we will consider it again on the 18th of February. And we may or may not seek a briefing from the officials, but the members content with both of those SL1s, not content with them in policy terms, but content that we follow the processes I've just described. Content. Okay. Now, correspondence, we just have, I think, one, which is, no, two. 13.1, which is from the ESR, who has published her 53rd report with nothing for us to note. 13.2 is from the Youth Assembly Big Youth Survey Report 2025 at page 42. That is for the plenary Youth Assembly on the 24th of January. That's for us to note. Agenda 14 is draft board work programme. Now, I should say, first of all, thank you. I will not be here next week. The Deputy Chair has very kindly agreed to step in. Thank you very much, Deputy Chair. I don't know if the clerk wants to give us an update on, we obviously will have the reval briefing next week.
We will, Chair, yeah. And we also have an indicative general timing for an integrate visit. The department has invited the committee down to look at the integrate work. We're talking about probably the first meeting after Easter for that. We also are looking at a written briefing at the end of the consultation, probably about mid-February, on the census consultation. And we'll probably then look for an oral briefing later on in the year, obviously with no time pressure on that. Census isn't until 2031, so there's lots of time. Review of ALBs has moved to the 20th of May. That was based on last week's discussions, Chair. And final DOF briefings on both bills will be 25th of February. So that will round off all oral briefing on both bills. However, committee will have already undertaken a number of weeks of informal deliberation at that point. So that really allows members to have returned their views to the department and for the department to be giving its final response to those. There'll then be a few weeks for the committee to decide where it wants to go on both bills, with, I'm hoping, a fairly reasonable completion before the deadline of the 27th of March.
Have we had anything from DOF in terms of multi-year budget and when they may or may not want to brief us?
We are currently in negotiation on that one, Chair. It's a tricky position for DOF because it's a DOF issued draft budget. Therefore, we have comment on DOF's elements. Okay. Because they can stand behind.
Not agreed yet by the executive.
No, so it's a tricky position then to brief on it. Although we have written to the other committees, Chair, and asked them to seek briefing on their aspect of budget for their department. It's really to try and inform the exercise that will have to be undertaken. Because it's obviously out for consultation, so it's important that committees kind of establish a view. However, overarching briefing is tricky before that agreement.
I would just say that puts us in a pretty invidious position, in my view, as chair, we're in a situation where we have the first multi-year budget in a decade and a half, but because it's not agreed, because it was issued in the absence of agreement, the Finance Committee is effectively unable to scrutinise it because it's not really a draft multi-year budget yet. I appreciate the Minister's put it out and wants to get it agreed, but from a committee chair's perspective, it's really suboptimal, because if the department will not come before us and explain the multi-year budget that's in draft, we can't really tell the public that we're scrutinising it in detail. So let's hope it's either agreed or they choose to come in front of us and at least tell us about the process they followed. I do think we should be pushing to say, if the department is publishing this, then they should be willing to come to a statutory committee and talk about it. We'll wait and see if we get anything back. But
we do have them for DOF budget. I should have said that on the 4th. However, that's just the DOF element. Which
that is the DOF budget, but I would say, I presume they're listening, that this is not a sustainable position for very much longer. If we accept the idea that there's still political discussions or executive discussions going on, I think if the department is publishing a draft multi-year budget, it's on their website, it's been presented to the Assembly, the Finance Committee should be able to ask questions about it, and it's a bit of a preposterous situation that we aren't. But I'll leave that for now. We'll try and come back on it. Yes, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, Chair, and I remember the DOF officials being in briefing us and us questioning them on the actual Department of Finance departmental multi-year budget proposals, the 3-year plan going forward, and that will have happened, I presume, across all of the other committees. Did we ever liaise with them to ask for the other committees' feedbacks on their multi-year budget scrutiny? Have we got some feedback?
We've given them a reasonably long lead-in. That's really for our round-robin report, which we'll bring a debate on. So we've asked them to assess and seek briefing on what has been put out for consultation on their 3-year budgets, and they're proceeding with that. I know at least a couple of the committees have either had a briefing or are scheduled for a briefing, and others will be following suit. Chair, I'd also indicated to them, because there is a fair bit of discussion now, which is slightly newer, around legislation that's coming before committees and whether or not it is actually backed by budget. So there's a number of current bills where there are a number of elements of those that, if commenced, would cost considerable amounts of budget. There'd be considerable budget allocations for them, and officials generally are responding that, well, they don't know if they will have that budget, or they're not going to be sure, or whatever. So I've asked for feedback on that as well. That's a new thing. We've not really done that before. It's just the kind of time scale we're in at the minute, near the end of the mandate, means there's a lot of legislation. So it presents that opportunity. Almost every committee has a bill. And almost every committee is looking at how that will be financed. So it's just additional feedback. It broadens out the discussion and highlights the basis on which you would want to do a multi-year budget, purely if you're going to be legislating into the future, so you know you have some kind of stable basis in which to fund it. So it'll be a broader based discussion than it would normally be. We've already gone out with our requests on that, Chair.
Okay. It would be helpful if the committee could go back and look. There was a multi-year budget, again, a draft multi-year budget published without agreement in 2021 or 2.
Yeah, for 22 to 25.
Yeah, it would be helpful to see if the then committee, which I was on, undertook any briefing or briefing was agreed to, because I think if that's precedent, then we should cite that to the department and say we have a right to at least ask questions about how this was formulated.
I think they did the round robin exercise, Chair. We'll go back and check what briefing there was.
I mean, the department, they will brief us on things where there is a position that the Minister has, but that hasn't, including on rates reform. I just think we will be in an absurd position if we cannot, as a committee, do any scrutiny on the draft multi-year budget. But I've said that, and we will revisit it. Again, I won't be here next week, but thank you to the Deputy Chair for stepping in. So members are going to move on now. So we seek members' agreement that we'll publish the forward work programme on the website. And then we're going to move on to any other business. Is there any other business?
Chair, just to go back to an item previously and just seek committee agreement to write to the Speaker regarding timescales and issues raised during the meeting in the closed session around Standing Order 42A.
Yes. Of course, yes, I had intended to raise that. Yes, I think we should be ready for that, and possibly copying it to the Procedures Committee again, because we've discussed the matters around we had the Data Use and Access Bill situation, shall we say, and this is another example of, in a different way, a suboptimal process. Okay. Any other business anyone would like to raise? No. Okay. Agenda item 16 is date, time and place of the next meeting. It's here, Wednesday 20th of January at 1 o'clock. Earlier start, in the Senate chamber of Parliament buildings. I'll now put the question. The committee does now adjourn. The committee is now adjourned.